guys, we got George and Tammy behind the scenes. So good to see you guys this morning. We're going to get ready to go. I'm going to let everybody in. So take a deep breath and get ready to rock.
Let's do it. All right. Well, welcome everybody to the 2022 all virtual Motorsports Sponsorship Summit. George Hamill, Megan Meyer, and I are excited to have you guys here. It's our first ever virtual summit. So we're going to see what we can do. George is behind the scenes. He's running tech and he's making things happen. Megan, I know she's there. I see her on the screen. Hi. She's traveling too. So Megan's calling in from a hotel.
Yes, I am in Crested View, Colorado right now.
Love that area. It's so pretty out there.
It is.
Right on. Well, we like to pretty much just jump in and get started. So when Megan does her social academy, when I do the Meet the Sponsors webinars, not a lot of chit chat. We jump right in, get straight to the topics. The goal today of this summit is to, one is for, if you're a racer and you're looking for sponsors, we're going to teach you what's worked for us in finding sponsors, communicating with them, communicating value with them, and securing them. And then we're also going to take a lot of time today to show how things have changed in the past few years. Motorsports have changed, events have changed, COVID changed a lot. And so today it's not necessarily about getting a sponsor, it's about keeping that sponsor. And you keep sponsors by creating value for them. So we're going to talk a lot today about creating value, increasing your value so sponsors renew, and tapping into some of the tips and tricks and tools and things that we use to create more value when perhaps we're not getting on the podium all the time. And there's a lot of things that we can do. So we have a all-star cast of panelists and speakers. A lot of people I'm really excited to introduce you to and hear what they have to say about creating value for sponsors. Megan, did I forget anything or?
No, I don't think so. I think you touched on everything. So, yeah, we'll just be going all about why brand sponsors, decks, proposals, social media, podcasts, all that type of stuff. So that way we give you guys the tools so you can keep racing and so you can take your career to the next level with that funding that you're going to get from sponsorships.
So let's queue up our very first session, which is going to be return on investment and why brand sponsor. We have 4 big hitters. We have Richie Lewis from E3 Spark Plugs, Joe Parsons from Monster Energy, Eric Siebold from Permatex, and Tony Yorkman from K&N Filters. Are they queued up and ready to go? We're going to introduce the panelists. And then actually while they're getting queued up, I want to go a little bit over return on investment and why brand sponsor. What I see all the time is that companies get proposals and decks and marketing material from racers offering exposure. That's not going to help you land a deal. Sponsors don't need exposure. Most companies don't want exposure. Little companies, startups, yes, they want it, but the small companies that need the exposure, the ones that don't have the money, so they're probably not the best ones to go for. Different companies need different things. Manufacturers, they want to prove their functionality. Retailers, they want foot traffic into the retail store. Service companies want to show their services and offerings and hours, and they want to show why you need to call them versus their competitor. Food and beverage companies, they want sampling. I say it a lot, but we don't really go into a grocery store very often and buy something we've never tried. So sampling is important. And so today, our list of panelists on the first session, we're going to talk about what do these brands and companies value? What do they look for? Do they calculate return on investment? And if so, how? And why do they sponsor? So who do we have queued up here? Let's start with Eric Siebold. Is Eric there?
All right, I'm here.
There he is.
Eric,
you calculate ROI. Does Permatex calculate ROI? What is ROI? And if not, why are you sponsoring?
So that's a good question and a tough one to come up with. And here's something I kind of always say to racers. If you can show any sort of ROI, even if it's wrong or an estimate, right? It's probably more than the marketing people have. And like, we don't calculate an ROI on our sponsorships. What we do is, we know what works and what doesn't, right? We try to track some metrics such as obviously your little ones like click-through rates and stuff, but really if we can measure where traffic comes from to our website, which we have ways to do, if we can measure if those clicks click through to Advance Auto, say, or if we partner with someone and we use a promo code, and then they use that code at an AutoZone or an O'Reilly. We have ways to track some of these things with metrics so we get an idea of what works, but we're not tracking ROI. So I feel like, though, ROI is a conversation that always has to be had.
Right. I think that's common. I would say a lot of, you and I have talked about it many times, that there are several things that you look for, but ROI is sometimes, a guesswork, and it's based off experience. Let me do this. Let's ask a couple of the others real quick.
Yep.
If Monster Energy or E3 spark plugs or K&N filters let's go to K&N. Tony Yorkman, does K&N calculate ROI? And then Eric will come back and we'll go into detail on why do you sponsor. Let's start out with just ROI real quick. Do we calculate it? And if so, how?
Yeah, I echo Eric's sentiment there. I mean, we try. It's like he says, it's very difficult. I mean, it really depends on the space or the asset. There are a lot of variables that go into some of it, so it's subjective. On-site's a great example of the struggles you can have calculating ROI. There really isn't a way to calculate the quality of an interaction between a racer and a fan, but those interactions can be the greatest value. So the quality of your metrics, doesn't necessarily rank you higher or lower overall, in my opinion.
Right. Richie, are you there? E3 spark plugs.
Yeah. Those guys are spot on. The biggest part of it for us is, it's all about driving sales. If you're working with someone and you can see that it's driving sales, you're measuring ROI more so through the corporate side than you are just that singular column. It's hard to see that. And I think that's kind of what they're saying. I know it is for us. It's hard to see it. But anytime we're looking at a sponsor, why are you sponsoring? All the questions that are here on the it's all about, if anybody can bring us something that drives sales, that we can say, okay, we give them $1 and we can make $10, then that's a good deal, But if it's about exposure and things of that nature, you can't put that, doesn't translate or correlate back to ROI.
Yeah, and
it has to come back from ringing the cash register, and either the person can help you ring the cash register, or they can't, and therefore that entails a lot of why you do what you do.
Sounds like sponsorship is not just about going out and racing and having fun and putting logos and banners up, but it's about understanding the business of the sponsor and trying to help that sponsor increase business. Let's ask Joe Parsons from Monster Energy. I don't know how you calculate ROI when it comes to a beverage, other than perhaps sector sales going up or regional sales or sales after an event. You and I have talked about this before, Joe. What's your take on return on investment, and why does Monster sponsor?
It's a very good question. I think that's everyone's searching for those types of easy equations, that formulate a resolution, right? But, from us, yes, we're a beverage company, but we're selling a lifestyle.
Yes.
The beverage itself, you could say, is the vehicle that generates revenue that allows us to play in the sandbox. And as long as we can have those funds to play in the sandbox, we will continue to play in that sandbox. You can look at across all of our athletes that we've had from the early years. Most of them are still with us, whether they're full-time racing or not. Shannon Campbell, for instance, look what he's done in bringing value. He's brought his family into it. So he's planted new seeds like the farmer, right? Even though he's not that guy. Look at Brian Deegan. Another perfect example that has planted new seeds within his own farm, and he's generating more value. And they're creating content on their own. They are their own brand, And of course, these are the bigger assets and the easier assets to kind of look at, look at a Ken Block or, but we do have those niche areas as well. And you look at the whole piece of the pie, and all those slivers add up,
Right.
We can't be a brand for everybody, we're going to offend some people, and we're going to win some hearts on some people, but we need to be true to ourselves. We need to be true to our brand, and it's getting a little bit stickier these days with the way the world is becoming somewhat soft in being so judgmental on cracking a joke. And wow, I don't want to offend but I can remember growing up when we cracked jokes, or listening to Richard Pryor, or any of those guys, and we looked at that purely as that's comic, that's fun, we didn't, I can't believe that guy said that. So we're always dealing with a lot of things, negative, positive, but whether it's negative, positive, if they're talking about you that you've been to the dance, whether you danced or not, it's a good thing.
and you guys are in, you said, many sandboxes. You guys have a lot of playgrounds and a lot of sandboxes because Monster is everywhere. You have a lot of different customers. You can literally sell to anybody, not necessarily just an endemic racer who needs parts for a car.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing is we look at customers as fans. They're not consumers. They're fans. Right. And when fans take the time to get off the couch and get in their car with their friends and family and hop on a plane or a train and go that extra effort to go out to an event, it's our job to make sure they have a good time.
Right.
First and foremost.
Right.
And if that works, whether it's 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 people, then we're doing our job, and we're chopping that tree little by little. It's not that big axe that's going to knock it down.
Right. And I think what's really important about that is when you do market, you're marketing in a moment when fans and spectators, event attendees are having fun. And it's much easier to send your brand message across and to interest people in a brand or a new product when they're having fun, because people are more open-minded to learning when they're in a fun situation. So talk about fun, we're going to go back to racing. Let's stay endemic for a second. Eric, Permatex is a very endemic brand. Clearly, you're not selling to the average consumer. You're selling to a very specific customer. So Motorsports seems to be a pretty good reason to sponsor and to market through Motorsports, because a lot of the racers are mechanics and wrenching, and they use your thread lockers and things. Let's continue on. You were talking about ROI and using it for brand recognition and brand equity. Let's talk a little bit more about that. If a racer or a team isn't necessarily selling more products because you can't really track the sales, what can they do for Permatex to raise the brand image? I know that that's a pretty important component of your sponsorships.
Yeah, so I'd answer that by saying that even though we already think of endemic as niche, right, there are still very defined segments within that endemic area, right? So we've always had, or historically, I should say, we've had a pretty good hold on like the drag racing crowd and the NHRA crowd, right? But, and that's where we focused a lot of our efforts. But several years ago, we decided that we wanted to get to a younger demographic and a little more to show that we're on the forefront of what's going on in motorsports. So we shifted some of our strategy to Formula Drift, and we got in with a young driver in Formula Drift. So what this did for us was, even though it's all endemic in motorsports, it shifted where the brand was going, right? The brand had been your tried and true, always there, reliable at the drag strip. Now we took it, and all of a sudden we're in the tuner crowd, right? We're focusing on these guys that are hopping up Honda engines instead of building high-powered Hemis for the drag strip. So we shifted that. So we're looking, the short answer is we have a strategy of where we want to take the brand in terms of the demographic we want to hit. And then we go out and we're looking for not only racers that have that audience, but can also generate us the content, which I know is something that Megan and you are going to talk about plenty over the course of the day. But content for us is really, really a big piece, and does that content that they can generate line up with the type of content we want our brand represented by?
Right. Yeah. And that makes sense. And I suspect that's common across the board. I know, Tony, you and I have spoken many times at K&N about your racers and your sponsored athletes bringing in content and creating value through content. Is that still a primary reason of sponsorships for K&N?
I think it's imperative for others to tell your story. Our story being the product validity. And we use Motorsports as a platform, to tell the world our products are superior, and racers can prove that for us. Often there's a big misconception between the story and the consumer. And usually the story, the story perceived is that sponsors pay people to run their products. And for us, we're partnering with them to share why they choose to run our products. So content is key to making that happen, and having their own original content that speaks to their audience, helps clear up that story and define those lines.
And that makes sense, because stories are easier to remember than stats and figures and numbers. So if a racer goes and shows how many times they won and what events and how many people were there, it's very difficult to remember, and for a marketing director to tell that to the CEO or the CFO when they're determining budgets. But when you have a good story, that story is pretty easy to share. People remember stories. Richie, I know you and I were talking earlier about the 3 Ps of why E3 spark plugs, and especially your philosophy on sponsorships when it comes to process, problem, and purpose. Let's go into that for a second, because I think that is very relevant right now to the discussion of why E3 sponsors.
I want to take, just before we do that, and step back and echo what Tony and Eric were saying. And basically, it's validation. If a K&N air filter or Permatex gasket sealer or holder or thread lock or whatever, if it's good enough for XYZ segment of motorsports, then it's good enough for ABC segment of motorsports. Yeah. And it translates and it carries over. That's the same thing. I mean, we have NHRA plugs, and if they're good enough to run a top fuel dragster, then they're good enough to run, your off-road truck or your late model or whatever, your grassroots car, whatever it may be, and or your passenger car, because that's where the real numbers are at the end of the day. So sorry to step back in that, but I just to me, it's validation. And that's really what they're saying. And we're all saying the kind of the same thing, with just a little bit different. But back to, oftentimes with people, there's, and especially for people that are hunting sponsorships, and this is what Alex and I were talking about, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. You're trying your best to get a sponsor, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, you got all these problems because you don't have sponsors. You either can't afford tires, you can't do this, or you can't do that. And if I had this money, I could go win the Daytona 500 or Indy or Baja 1000 or whatever it may be. And they get caught up into the problem that's instead of the process of how to get there. And there is no one answer. It is a lot of different things, boxes that have to be checked in order to be able to get there, whether it's the ROI, whether you're a good brand ambassador, whether you create your own content. These are just 1,000 little bullet points on your yellow pad that you're hoping to get an athlete or a partner that you're partnering with who is an athlete that brings value to you. The one that can check the most amount of boxes now is working on the process. And if he's working on the process instead of worrying about his problem, then he builds a plan. And when they do that and you start to see that in people, that's what draws us to someone. That's what makes us want to go to lunch with that person. That's what makes us want to, when we show up at the racetrack, we want to come in bearing gifts, whether it's just food or whatever it may be, to help make their day a little bit better so that they have more time to do what they're doing. And also the technical side of it. We use these things just like, you look on anybody's hot rod. Majority of they're carrying K&N filters. They're put together with all these brands, these people that are here today, and they're there because they have done that, and they have researched, they have developed, and they have pushed and pushed and pushed, and weathered through those tough days of whether it was dust, whether it was water, whether it was rain, whatever it may have been, and they exceeded and they excelled in those situations, and in doing so, they created a brand. And it's so easy to take care of those 3 P's when you have a brand, and a brand that works.
Yes.
Than it is when you don't have a brand that works. And you can still accomplish the 3 P's, but at some point, those breakdowns and those failures will come back and haunt you every time. So, I hope I've answered your and hope that was value added at it.
No, I like that. I want to ask a follow-up question then. How important is it to have champions versus maybe newcomers, guys that are just starting out in racing? Does it matter who you're sponsoring? Do they have to be on the podium? Is that a big element of proving, or is that just icing on the cake?
Let's look at it from this perspective. If it's Rob McCachran is going to sell anything that he bolts on his race car, okay, because he's a champion, he's a winner. But there are those guys that are back there running in those 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th spots that sometimes, for a sponsor to have a Rob McCachran or have a Dale Earnhardt Jr. or have whoever it is that you want, at some point, it doesn't weigh out properly. And it becomes sometimes often not the right business model, because that person will hustle. That person will still be at the track. That person will still have all the exposures and all those little buzzwords that a lot of the racers want to use. But as long as this guy's using your product, or ladies, because there's a lot of that now, man. And they can, and they're oftentimes so much better than the guys at pushing those buttons that actually help drive sales. Because again, if Rob McCachran, and he would never do this, but I'm just saying this as an example, so please don't take it that way. But if he wasn't doing anything to help you drive sales, then it's not value added to you as a customer, Whereas someone else may be able to, and maybe they're a podium person, maybe they're just outside the podium trying to get to the podium, whatever they may be. But I think that's a lot of it. It's a way and measure on that, because can everybody afford John Force and his budget and what it takes to go and fly down the side of John Force's car? But you can, you might hop on, Hagen's car and be able to fly and be a partner there. And that's that, that happens every day in motorsports.
Yeah.
And those companies are still growing. They're still getting an ROI on that. And they have something there that they believe in that is helping them take that bottom right-hand corner, that P&L. At the end of the day, is it a good or bad number? And that's what it all boils down to, is that bottom right-hand corner on that P&L.
And so for the endemic brands, obviously K&N, Permatex, E3, it's quite logical to sponsor in motorsports. Let's go back to Monster Energy. Joe, we were talking about, you're selling lifestyle, and it's a playground, and there's a lot of people in the playground and a lot of sandboxes. How do you select new teams to represent Monster Energy, and how can someone who's watching the recording of this or who's on the call live today, how can they interest a brand like Monster in sponsoring them?
Well, we all have our different ways, people in my position in other companies, or even within Monster, we have our own ways of finding those new athletes, we are a brand that we don't use agencies, and we don't use agents to bring opportunities to us. Although agents, of course, have brought great opportunities to us, and of course we have, and we do at times, work with an agent, representing an athlete, for instance. But someone like myself, I'm at all the races that I'm involved in. you know, whether it's, you know, off-road at Dakar with all the, you know, the rallies or, you know, two-wheel speedway here in Europe, which is massive. The next generation, I mean, I just signed 3 people in the last year and a half. And why? Because they got on my radar. How did they get on my radar? They got on my radar through other athletes talking about them. They got on my radar by having maybe moments of success where you can kind of see, wow, this is a young kid racing with, you know, very experienced people, and he's got moments of success with a good pass or a good race or even a good weekend with a win. And it's not necessarily all about winning either. You know, I think one of the gentlemen here said it earlier is human stories are great, you know. Yeah. And for me, I like to look at some of the, you know, anybody can go and sign an Earnhardt, right? Anybody can go and sign a champion, but go and find that athlete that you believe in and that you can convince your leadership to believe in, and ride that storm, you know, good days, bad days, and you build a story. And every athlete, every race entity, you know, they have friends and families, and those stories are evergreen, right?
Yes.
They live on, they live forever. They don't date themselves. I mean, all of us today, I'm sure I like to go on and look at YouTube at some of the old racing, you know, and had no one captured that, I wouldn't be able to see that, you know. So you could say that's brand equity, brand value that we're looking for, rather than a return on investment today. Yeah.
Right. Now that's cool that you talk about stories, and Tony was mentioning the same stories. Tony, we're going to go back to K&N for a second, because if a racer can't help increase sales, perhaps through the story and the storytelling, they can improve brand equity. You know, revenue is sales times quantity sold. If you can't increase quantity sold, you can still increase revenue by increasing the price that you're selling those units for, and you increase prices by increasing brand equity. K&N is obviously a premium filter and premium brand because the equity value of the brand has gone up, and I think that's through a lot of storytelling and a lot of winnings, obviously. What would you attribute it to? How would you say brand equity has risen through sponsorships at K&N? And remember, you were muted last time.
You know, I got a little proactive on that one. Right. No, you know, so equity is a big key to what we have. I mean, it's history. K&N, you know, being a 50-plus-year-old company and working throughout the different motorsports, and going back to even what Richie says is going. You know, it took a lot of podiums to get there, and people starting to realize what the product can do and how it can help them in their journey. But it also comes down to more about the stories and outside of those podiums. I say that we tend to look much further past the podiums, and to coach from earlier, it is just icing on the cake. So I think that it becomes more of an investment on our side to make sure that we are well covered throughout any field of motorsports, and make sure that we have heavy participation by letting them know what we can do to help them down their path.
That makes sense. Are there any investments that you're looking for in the future? Like what series or areas are you looking at potentially to recruit some racers to represent K&N?
I don't think we have anything outside of where we're at in the norm. I mean, we're going to probably be spending a lot more time reinvesting in the motorsports that we've kind of been in bed with for a long time. You know, drag racing, circle track, and so on. And I think if anything, more expanding our participation in a lot of these areas, like off-road. You would think that off-road would be one of the biggest, virtues for a filtration company, right? Because of what it is. But for so long, it's been so difficult to capitalize on those opportunities and that marketing. It's taken a lot of resources to act on the off-road market. And there's been, big strides in that world. Matt Martelli, Matt's really brought off-road, in my opinion, to the forefront and to an average consumer. You know, off-road, and let's just say, Yep. In the desert racing, well, and then also capitalize on the side by side world alone, because it's just created such an expansion and enthusiast. To be an off-road fan, you had to be an enthusiast, it seemed like, at a certain point, and it was narrowed. And now we're having the general consumer and public that are actually being more involved in off-road, but it had to be in their face. They had to understand it. And Matt's been one of the leaders in that area. That's what I've always, loved about his program. So I think that, off-road will be a bigger key for us coming up for that reason.
Eric, how about yourself? Permatex, anything you're looking at in the future?
Well, yeah, and I'll tie it into the equity conversation, because unlike spark plugs or filters, which are hard parts, we have to be really careful with chemicals not to allow our products to become commoditized. And we don't want people to think of us as just a glue or a sealer, right? Because when you do that, all of a sudden you're on par with the rest of the market. We want to be seen, like Richie was talking about earlier, with that validation piece, and I think Tony talked about it too. We've got to be seen as that reliability, and while the racers show that through performance, it's all about us continuing to keep that equity up high. And when that equity's high, that allows us not to become a commoditized product. And that for us is one of the real keys, because like I say, there's overseas competitors that come in and they try, to come into the market, and we have a massive amount of market share. So everyone's kind of within like sealers, like gasketing and thread lockers. So everyone's always trying to take a little piece of our pie. So for us, it's elevating that equity and keeping the brand above what a competitor can do.
Right on. Well, all right, real quick then, Eric, we'll go around. Why don't we just stay with you for a second? And we have 10 minutes left, so we can all talk for about 2 minutes on it. But do you have any words of advice for racers who are watching this? What they can do to better position themselves to get sponsorships, maybe with your brand or with other brands, just in general, things that you've learned over the years that are very effective that you want to share, and that we can teach how racers can add value, create value, and secure more sponsorships with relevant companies. So
I would probably say the approach is what I see people needing most work with. Still, even those who understand to some extent what sponsorship is about still come to us often with what they're looking for. Hey, I'm looking for this. Can I get this? Could I just get some product? Right. And that's, one that comes up constantly. And is actually an easy one for someone like me to do. I mean, I can, give anyone product, right? So, but very few, if anyone, comes to me and says, what are you guys focused on this year? What are you trying to accomplish? And every company goes through some sort of strategic planning process. Every company has, say 3 to 5 objectives that they're moving towards over the next year or next 3 to 5 years. So we could answer those questions if they were ever asked, but it's rare that people come to us. And I think that would be a differentiator right off the bat. Like we talked about ROI earlier, and even though ROI isn't a calculation that we're running internally, if someone came to me and said, I'm really interested in giving you a great return on investment, all of a sudden that tells me that they've got me in mind and they've got my business in mind. And that's an approach I don't see taken often. So if, throughout the course of this whole day, if there's one thing I'd love to see racers change, it's their approach.
Right on. Right on. That's excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for the participation in this first session as a panelist. We're going to come back at the very end, like at the end of the summit, and we'll get your final words of wisdom as well. Let's move it over to Richie real quick, because you were also talking about tips and tricks, things that racers can do, to potentially get your eyeball.
Well, and I agree with presentation, how what they're bringing to you instead of just product for decal. That again, that's easy, but it's, unless you're really trying to get into that area, or you're, sometimes you do it just because you're flooded in a certain area. You do a little bit of that just because you don't, it's easier sometimes to just give a little product, get a decal, and begin a relationship and see it. But what I'm really looking for goes a few layers in, and that is, what type of B2B can they bring? What type of B2C can they bring? Can they bring business? Does their owners or their people, some of their other sponsors, have these businesses or these outlets or these lanes that we can get in, that we can truly turn to sales? And that's where really partnering with someone, really getting to know them, getting to know their owners. That's really what I'm looking for there. Yeah, you go to see the racer. We all want to be on the podium. We all want to be able to get up and rah and cheer, whether we're at an off-road race, an NHRA race, a NASCAR race, or a grassroots race, dirt late model, whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, just yesterday I sat and had lunch with one of our athletes, and 80% of the conversation is about his relationships and how we can either help his people who are in a given industry where they use a lot of gas and propane type generators for landfills. Well, man, that rings the cash register. Right. Way more so than this E3 logo and, hey, I'm running E3. What are you running? That's great. That's one box again that gets checked. But the ultimate box is if he can say, hey, while you're at Nashville coming up here next week, I want to introduce you to this guy because they have this type of equipment that we can bring. Now you're ringing the cash register. Now you really have that relationship. Now you're really able to go to that next level. Yes. And either it's business to business, when we're doing business with them, they're doing business with us, or he can get you business to customer. Either one of those is really where, that's a lot of what I'm looking for, what I'm, that's, to me, is a big part of what we do.
So they're essentially becoming a employee at the events while they're being sponsored by E3. They're representing E3 and becoming an employee or an extension of E3's marketing. You have to think like the brand, think like the brand manager, and think like a salesman for the brand when you're representing a brand. Richie, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you again at the end as we're doing our words of wisdom. Tony, let's stay with endemics real quick. Same thing. Same for you, Tony.
Yeah, I mean, we've covered this so many times, but I think it's definitely worth covering over and over again because we need it to be more legitimized. I'm looking for a marketing plan.
Yes.
And goals you can set for K&N, not a plan to race. That's great. I understand you want to race. I understand that's your passion. But the business side of it requires a marketing plan. That plan to race serves you and your team, and that plan to race should be part of your marketing plan, but it can't be the reason for us to partner. We look for more tangible assets and how you're going to sell more filters. So identify what you have to offer specifically for that company, and how that adds value to their plan. Because the generic Ricky Bobby logo placements on cars for a check isn't going to be enough for most people nowadays. Ultimately, your goal is to get financial support, and to do it, you have to show them, how to help them with their agenda, not just why you are the best in your sport or space. So, again, using Richie's term, click the register. How are you helping us click that register?
Right. Yeah, and you and I have talked about that many times. Thanks again, Tony. Tony, we'll see you at the end. Final words. Now let's go to the non-endemic, Monster Energy. We had 3 aftermarket brands and endemics, automotive companies. What are they looking for? Last words of advice. Joe from a beverage perspective, from a consumer brand perspective, from one of the biggest companies in the world perspective. What last advice do you have? Words of wisdom? What would you say in 2 minutes to racers on the call who need advice on sponsorships?
Be yourself.
Yeah.
Go do what you do. Have a good time doing what you do. And chances are our paths are going to cross. And when the paths cross, that's where the relationship gets kindled. And if it goes down the road, great. Then you end up doing a deal. Mm-hmm. I don't think I've done a deal off a deck that's just been sent to me. Not to say that decks aren't good. Typically, I request decks only to sell to my upper management.
Interesting. Yeah.
I don't look for a deck that's trying to sell me. You know, you walk down the street and someone says, hey, you got $5. Do you give them that $5? Chances are you don't give them that $5. But you walk in the store around the corner and you give that store $5 because you're getting something. You know, so someone out of the blue asking me for sponsorship is no different than the guy walking down the street saying, hey, bro, give me $5.
That's perfect. I like that. That's really good. I like that, Joe. That was good. Thank you very much. I like to start big and we're going to end big. We'll see you at the end. Some final words at the end of the day. And by the way, I know you're calling in from Poland, so I don't know what time it's going to be there, either now or at the end, but thank you, Joe.
It's 7:45 p.m.
PM. Okay. Well, we'll see at like 4 a.m. or something like that. I don't know. But what you were saying just now about, a deck, someone hands you a deck, do you give them money right away? Well, I'll tell you what, Megan and I are going to jump right on the topic of decks and proposals, because our second session, decks and proposals, I think is probably the most misunderstood area from what I've seen in sponsorships. Often what happens is a racer might find someone in marketing department or with the term marketing on a business card, and they give that person a deck or a proposal or a marketing material, or they give them whatever they have and they think it's the same thing. Everybody thinks decks are proposals and proposals are decks. They're not. They're very different. Decks and proposals are very different things. And let's make sure we have Megan back on here. I know that she's calling in. She's there. Okay. I'm getting a thumbs up. There she is. All right. So we'll go into a little bit more detail, but on decks and proposals, Megan's going to teach us how to write them, but I'm going to go over real quick. This is kind of how it works. Is a deck gets attention. A deck is what you want to use to start a conversation. It's what you want to use to meet somebody. And it's not used to sell, because you don't, like Joe was saying, some guy walks up and says, give me $5. Why? You don't sell somebody something unless they know who you are, you know them. It's like a proposal. You don't want to propose to somebody that you've never met. You propose to someone you've dated for a while and you know them, then the proposal can start a relationship. So the deck is a colorful document. It tends to have a lot of photos. The deck will have, it can even be a link. It can even be a video. Decks are eye candy. It's what you use to attract interest in your program to get that conversation started. Once the conversation started and the relationship is developed, then you can start to get to know the brand and what the brand wants and how you can help the brand. And then it's time to write an official proposal. And in the proposal, you'll list the deliverables that you can offer, what you can do for that brand, the company, and you'll try to put a value to them. We're going to go into valuations later as well, because you don't write a proposal based upon what you need, like our panelists were just saying. You write a proposal based upon the value to the company that you're presenting to. And so proposals are typically Word documents. They are text. And you have to be careful with proposals, because sometimes proposals, the text in a proposal gets cut and pasted and it becomes part of the legal document in a Schedule A. Because when I say legal document, I mean when you have an official sponsorship, it's a contract. And in that contract, it'll state how much they're paying you and what you're giving back. Well, the text from the proposal often is cut and pasted into the contract. So you want to be very careful. It could be legally binding what you're showing. So Megan, what did I miss? I'm kind of trying to go off the top of my head here. We're going to go into more detail now, the line items that go into a deck and a proposal. Do you have something to add before we go into that?
No, what? I just want to highlight, like what you said, the deck should talk about the assets. And so we're going to go over that in the next session. And I love how Eric said that you should ask questions about what their goals are and what the campaigns are that they have coming up, and to come to them as a solution to their problem, not as, hey, I need your product in order to race. So approaching it with ROI, I love what Eric and Joe and all the guys said about that earlier. And so I do just also want to add, and Alex, this came directly from your book. These are my notes that I have from your book. You said, don't send the deck until you have the marketing director's name and title. You don't just want to send out decks to every single company out there to whatever email address they have listed on their website or their contact form. You want to make sure you actually know exactly who you're sending it to, and hopefully have had a conversation with them before you send the deck about their goals and everything, so that way you know exactly what to include into it. And also in your book, you say that about 10% of contacts end up in new positions every year. So, making sure that you are actually reaching out to that right person that handles the sponsorships, whether they're in the marketing department, they could be in advertising, could be finance. You never know exactly who that person is. So you want to make sure you're sending it to the right person first. So I'm going to share my screen, and I have examples of both a deck and a proposal for you guys. And so on the screen right now is a deck that I have made actually just recently for my return to drag racing. So this is my first time announcing that I will be coming back to drag racing. And so I reached out to my old sponsor, NGK Spark Plugs, which you could see there on the picture. They were my title sponsors. So they were the first company that I reached out to in order to renew our partnership with them, to say, hey, I'm coming back. Would you like to hop on board? So this is just the title page. And then inside of the deck, I give a little bit of information about, the fact I'm kind of coming out of retirement. And then I give information about the 2 events that I'm coming to. And I have links to videos that they can go and watch, the promo videos of those races, so that way they can learn more about it, see what all the action's going to be, because these are exhibition special events making a lot of noise, not necessarily competition events. So then I go into, here's a list of all the assets, and this is focused on their new brand called Shop Squad. And now I had to have a conversation with NGK first to realize, hey, they came out with this new brand called Shop Squad. I wouldn't have known that that's what they're looking to promote if I did not have a conversation with them beforehand. And it's just picking up the phone and calling them. It doesn't have to be, a formal presentation or anything like this, but just saying, hey, just exactly like what Eric said, what are your goals? What are your campaigns that you're doing for the next year? So I always include press reach, and on here you can see Drag Illustrated is the partner media that we work with exclusively for drag racing. And so I have on here the readership number, so 10,000 print for each issue and 5,000 digital viewers for each issue. And then I dive into social media. I list out a few content ideas of what we could do, and then I give them some of our analytics. So this is for the entire year from January to May. And I highlighted, we got over 1.8 million impressions in April on Instagram. And then you can see that happened in April. And then what happened in May, our follower growth skyrocketed from there. And so we're just trying to make sure we can ride that momentum and keep getting our reach stronger on social media. I always include a wrap design. So this was something I made again because I knew, hey, Shop Squad is the company that they want to promote, and yellow is their primary color. So that yellow is actually one of the colors that I include in my own branding, and then it ties in really well with the blue that I have for my logo. And so I did a whole design for the car, crew uniform, so that way they can see it, and it's just an easier way for them to just say, yes, this looks great, let's sign off on it. I then listed off some other items. So hero cards, we're gonna have a QR code that takes them to recruitment page for the Shop Squad, t-shirts, tickets, videographer, signage, stuff like that. And then the Flow Racing TV, it does the live streaming. So again, viewership numbers, 35,000 per event last year and this year. We also pitched to them doing a car and driver display in town before the race starts. And then there's a few other items here that we listed if they wanted to become bigger partner for the Nitro Chaos event. And then just the thank you page right after that. So that's the deck. So as you can see, very colorful, not a whole lot of, I mean, I did have a lot of text, but a lot more graphic heavy, whereas a sponsorship proposal is a lot more different. And so we do have a template that is available for you guys. And so I will pull that one up now onto my screen that you guys can see. Let me pull up the right document here. Okay, and I'm just going to go over this really quickly as well. We do have the template available for members that are watching live or that are going to be watching the replay of the summit. And so we will provide the link for you guys to be able to purchase the template, but I also am having a coupon code for 25% off. So if you use the code SUMMIT on my website, you'll get 25% off, and it's originally $75 for the template. So this is the Word document for the proposal, and very just only text, really no graphics, no images. It's very straight to the point. So we have table of contents, and then we just have a brief summary, and then I include schedule, and then here's all the deliverables, which is all the assets that we're going to be talking about next, the intangible and tangible assets. So product, services, branding, livery, hospitality, appearances, press, social, digital media, and then any other. These ones are just what we include in the template because this is based on what I've done in the past. And so it's just there ready to go. You just have to plug in exactly what it is you're going to be doing for that sponsor according to what you guys have agreed upon on your own conversations. And then I include brand endorsement. So this is saying, hey, this is how we're going to actually represent your company. So how are we going to represent them on social media? How are we going to tag them, hashtag them, all that type of stuff? Is there a certain website that they want us to drive traffic to? Do you have an affiliate link? Do you have a coupon code? Anything like that. And then duties as brand ambassador. So these are just very common sense, but we want to make sure that we include them so that way you know, and also sharing this with your team members as well as saying, hey, we need to be wearing branded t-shirts. We need to be wearing branded hats. We can't be wearing, our friend's t-shirt. Maybe you're best friends with someone else that you race with, but their t-shirt is, they have a logo of a company that is a direct competitor of who you're trying to reach out to get a sponsorship. So you want to make sure your crew guys know, hey, we know you love that t-shirt, but you can't wear it when you're at the track representing us and representing our sponsors as well. And so stuff like that. And then on the last page here, we just have the funding request. And so we can split it up 50-50 if you want to do it by quarter, if you want to do it per event, or just 100% all up front. You can kind of change exactly how those terms are. Again, it really varies and depends on what you agree with the company that you are pitching to. So those are just really quick overview of the two different types of documents. Like what Alex said, sometimes people get them mixed up. Sometimes they accidentally send a deck instead of sending a proposal, or vice versa. So if you guys have any questions at all about those, feel free to reach out to me after the summit.
And we can also do is where I'm sitting, I cannot see if there are any chat room questions, but we have a little extra time right now. So if you have any chat room questions, type them in and we'll try to address those now. What's real important from the proposal perspective, and Megan was saying this, is, and all the prior speakers also in the first session were mentioning, is it's important to show the value of what you can do from the brand's perspective, not what it costs you to race. You don't want to put in a proposal how much you need to race, therefore please give me this money. What you want to put in a proposal is, here's the value I can create for you. You normally might pay $10,000 for this. I can do it for $2,000 because I can get you all of this visibility. So if you can show $2,000 or show $10,000 of value at a $2,000 cost to a sponsor, they're getting a 5 times return for that. So we do have a couple chat room questions. George, I don't know if your mic is on there. Let's try.
So let's go with the first chat room question from JC Silva. Said, can the deck be an online web page or better recommended to be a presentation file?
I see them all the time as online. I see online PowerPoints. I see links. I see videos. Even a good website can be a deck if you can get someone to go to the website. The challenge with anything online is getting somebody to physically hold it and look at it. If you're meeting somebody in person, you like to hand them something so they have it in their hand. But if it's a link, if it's a website, if it's online, then yes, you can reach them electronically. Megan, do you have thoughts on, have you had better successes with online or digital versus physical decks?
Yeah, and so this was actually something that I wanted to touch on and forgot about. So the software that I use for creating my decks. So I do have a degree in graphic design. So I use all the Adobe professional softwares, and I've realized that there's maybe some easier tools out there instead of doing a whole entire deck from scratch. And so I use a website. It's called canva.com. That's CANVA, canva.com. And so that is actually what I use nowadays for all of my decks, for me, for my clients. And I also do like our social media reports through Canva, and our fulfillment reports I do inside of Canva. And so I like using Canva because it's all online. It is free. They do have paid options. But you really don't need the paid version of it. The paid version really just gets you access to like more fonts, be able to use their stock photography, video, stuff like that. So with racers, you really don't need that, especially like because you're going to be using your own pictures, videos. So you really don't need any of that stuff. So just stick with the paid version. And also they have so many templates. So what I do is I create a presentation template. And then when I am sending this to a sponsor, so I'll try, if I can, I'll try and go over it with them in person, whether, whether we are physically in person or over Zoom, be able to present it and then send it to them in an email. So I can send them the link to view the presentation, or I can send them, I can download it as a PDF from Canva and then attach that onto the email. And then again, if we are meeting in person, then printing it off and getting it binded and bringing it with me there that way for them. So if you just go to canva.com, you just need to set up a login really quick and then go to their templates. They have so many templates. So from presentations to flyers, business cards, social media posts, really anything that you could design, you can do it inside of here. And so if you go to their templates and you can just search for pitch deck. And so that's what I do. And they have tons, literally hundreds of different templates here that you could choose from. And so that is what I have done. It saves so much time. You just need to insert your own pictures, your own text, logos, stuff like that. So you can take, just a couple of hours and you can have one done completely instead of trying to start from scratch. So that's how I design my decks.
Excellent. Nice. George says there's another question.
Yeah, so we actually have 3 questions that kind of fall in line with each other. I think you guys would probably be able to answer them all at the same time. One of them was the length of the decks or the proposals. Is it better to send a 2 to 3 pager and get it done quickly? And then also, along with that, one of the audience members was asking, what is the difference between, let's just say, a racer and a content provider?
I think a racer and a content provider technically are going to be the same thing from a sponsor's perspective, because the sponsor or the company is looking for that person to be a brand ambassador for that company and create value for the company. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to create value in many different areas. So racers can create value by getting on the podium and getting media. But let's say you're not getting on the podium or getting media, you can still create that value organically yourself with all the tools that we have. And we will go into that in several other sessions. So for that one, I think they're both about the same. In terms of the length, I've seen some really long and boring decks. And I've seen some 1 or 2 pagers that really wanted me to learn more about that team. So it really depends on how well you're representing through, in my opinion, graphics and images are more important when it comes to a deck, how you're representing what a brand can be part of. The deck is to inspire. It shows your intangibles. It shows the things that are priceless, like reputation, integrity, lots of happy fans. And if you can do that through photos, you don't need many. I'd rather see 1 or 2 good photos on a page than a bunch of little ones. I think the small logos or small photos clutter things up. A proposal needs to be you want to show as much value in the proposal as possible, and it's line items. So most proposals are just a few pages long. There are some standard obligations that go into proposals, like legalese, maybe, who to contact, point of contact, references, things like that. So those are very standard. But when it comes to the deck, I think it's better to have a short and sweet and powerful deck than a long, boring one. Megan, have you thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think you need to keep it short. I would say for mine that I showed you, it was a little bit longer because I listed out a lot more details inside of it, and it's 18 pages. And so I feel like that's like maximum what you should do. But again, I sat, like, I had that conversation with them, and so I created all of these assets that we're going to talk about next. And so I included a lot of that in the deck. Now, if you maybe you don't have that many assets that you're going to present to them, or you are still kind of keeping it open, then your deck won't be that long. I would say if it's 1 or 2 pages, then you're probably leaving out important information that you should be including in there. But again, you don't want it to be long and boring. So you do want to include a lot of pictures, and you really like think about it as a slideshow presentation. You want to just have like kind of bullet points on there. You will always want to include numbers of results. So like I had readership, I had viewership, I had social media data in there. So you want to have those results and those numbers in there as graphs and all that stuff, but you also want to include really good pictures like what Alex mentioned, and any graphics you have. So like if you're doing car rendering, t-shirts, any banners, or if you're gonna wrap your whole trailer, whatever designs you have, then it's great to also include those in the deck. So that way it's just easier for them to say, oh yes, that looks great, we love that, let's go ahead and move forward with that, instead of it being like, okay, well now we need to get in touch with our creative department and then we'll get back to you, and go back and forth and spending a lot of time on that. So if you can include that stuff, then that's awesome, go ahead and include it, but also don't let that hold you back if you can't. Done is better than perfect. Go ahead and send it out if it's like 80-90% done, because then that way you can still, when you're presenting it to them, you still have that conversation to kind of fill in those blanks.
Right on. Thank you. George?
So we had a couple really awesome questions come in, but I think we're going to try to save those for later. Something about trying to understand what the denomination of funds that you can ask for and your value, as well as approaching people at events. But we did get one great question that came up that's associated with the decks. Let's see here. Ryan Heller said, "Are there any major differences in decks that a team would send versus an individual racer?" Looking for more information on the team situation rather than just a single individual racer.
That's a good one, because yes, I think when you are selling you have a lot more value when you're selling a team versus an individual. Usually when an individual is sponsored, it's a personal services agreement. They get sponsored by a company to represent that company and wear that company's logos in public. And that's a personal services agreement. That's not necessarily a racing sponsorship. Most sponsors that I've encountered in racing expect that they are sponsoring the entire team and all the members of the team. So I think that it's important to include that in a deck if it does come with it. That is, if everybody on your team is saying, no, we're not going to support that sponsor, is what Megan was saying earlier, it leads to inconsistency and it might not attract a sponsor.
Yeah, well, so I can attest to this one. So for so just a little bit of background for people that don't know. So I used to race an NHRA top alcohol dragster, going to be making a little comeback for a little bit. But so on our team, we typically run 2 dragsters at every event. So when I was competing, it was me, and it's my family's team. So, my dad used to race. So, what we did was when he stepped out of driving, and he's just crew chief now, we opened up his car and let rental drivers come in and drive his car for 1 or 2 races per year. So I'd be racing full time, and then we would just have different racers come in and join to come and race, because typically, drag racing is very expensive. And if there's someone out there that wants to race, but, they don't have enough funds or the knowledge of how to start their own team and run a car like that, we have that opportunity for them to come and join us. So when I am approaching a sponsorship, I have done it both ways, where it's just individually, where it's just me working with them. And then I've also done it where I'm representing the entire Randy Meyer Racing team, and I'm trying to get a sponsor for the team. And then also the drivers that do come on and join our team that rent out the car, part of their job is they need to provide funding. So they need to go and find their own sponsorships. But if they're going to be a member of our team, they have to realize that they are representing the sponsors of the Randy Meyer Racing team. So they cannot bring any competing sponsors onto our team. So a great example would be, we were sponsored by NGK Spark Plugs. They could not go and reach out to E3 and say, hey, I'm going to drive for this team. Is E3 going to sponsor me? They'd come to us and we'd be like, sorry, you can't drive for us. So if you are someone that is kind of in that position where you're renting out the car, you don't own the car or own the team, then first and foremost, you need to have a meeting with the team owner and whoever handles their marketing, to say, hey, this is who we have agreements with, exclusivity in certain categories. You cannot bring a competing company onto our team. We will not be able to run logos, anything like that on the car, because that's part of our agreement with this other company that we're partnered with. And so first, make sure you have that conversation, so hey, I can't reach out to this company, I can't reach out to this one, stuff like that. But hey, I can go over here and try to talk to, let's say, Monster Energy or Permatex, something like that. So then on the other hand, if you are someone that is representing the team and you're trying to find sponsors for everybody on the team, then like I said, I've done it both ways, and I feel like whenever I am creating the decks, I will always include information about each of the drivers on the team, and I'll do maybe like half a page for each one, depending on how many it is. I'm not going to have 5 pages of biography for each of our drivers. Again, we want to keep it short and keep their attention. So I would say try to limit it to half a page for biography for one driver. So you could do 2 per page. Just a headshot, quick bullet points of their accomplishments, track history, stuff like that. And, if they have a good following on social media, you can always include that as well. So team-wise for decks, you would include information about the drivers and kind of, so that way the brand can see, how, if you're diversified, what the audience is that you have overall as a team. And then also you can include their social media insights and all that stuff inside of the deck as well, just to kind of impress them more and be like, hey, let's say we reach 10,000 people each month on our team page, but then our drivers each reach 10 or 20,000 on each of their pages. So let's say altogether you're getting 30,000 reach instead of before, just saying in the team, it would have just been 10,000, if that makes sense.
All right. That was good, actually. Thank you. George?
So I just want to make a quick comment here. There's a couple people that said they just joined like midway through and they had the same questions that we've already gone over. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that these will all be available after the summit as well. So you guys can go back, record them, look at them, and look at all the recordings and check it out later.
Yes, that's true. Thanks for that. We're going to do our best to get a good copy of this recording. That's why we're going to stop at halfway and render the first half for Zoom. And that way this will be posted for everybody that's attending the call to come watch it anytime this year. One important thing on the decks that I kind of forgot to mention is the decks and proposals, you want to time them right. Sometimes you use a deck when you want to get to know somebody and to reach out to somebody new. and it gets their interest. Now, but the deck needs to precede your demand for, or your request for money, by probably a year or even more, because you need some time to get to know that brand and they need time to get to know you. A proposal, on the other hand, you want to send that in their sweet spot when they're making budgeting decisions for the next fiscal year. All companies operate their marketing budgets usually on fiscal years. Different companies have different fiscal years depending on what industry they're in or where they're from, what country they're in. About 3/4, I think, or so are on the traditional calendar year. So for the most part, you're good if you send a proposal around August, September, because it could be considered around October. That's also why SEMA is timed to be in November. There's very strategic timing on a lot of these trade show events, is because that's when new products come out. It's when companies start new fiscal years, when they make new announcements. And when they're making that budget plan, that's when you want to hit them with the proposal. The deck you can send anytime, because the deck you're trying to get to know somebody and you need to attract their attention and then build a relationship from there. So once you've gotten to know them, you send the proposal when they're looking at their budgets. Was there another question or no? Okay. Another thing on decks and proposals, there are times when I've done it myself many times, when I've sent marketing materials to a company and I thought that it was part of a larger organization because the name, Subway is a great example. I approached Subway for a long time and I got to know someone at Subway really well. It turns out that was just a franchise holder, and he owned one little franchise of Subway. And I was talking to someone who had a very small regional marketing budget, who was just able to market locally to bring people in from the neighborhood into that Subway store. Realize when you're sending stuff out, are you sending it to a franchise or to a COCO, a company owned and company operated? What you want is somebody like, let's say, Monster Energy, owned by shareholders, and they're traded on the stock market, and it's one company with one budget, not a franchise with a very small local budget that might tap into a larger marketing budget. But then if you do tap into the larger marketing budget, it's a long process and it's very difficult. I've not had a lot of results or success with that. George says that there's another question.
It's along the lines of exactly what you're talking about, Alex. And Dina Priest says, what's the best way to find the correct contacts or to see the correct person that you're going to send it to?
Yeah, it's funny you say, because honestly, a phone call to the receptionist has worked best for me. Yes, I look people up on social or LinkedIn primarily is where I like to do some research, because people will post what they want you to see about themselves professionally on LinkedIn. So we're going to have a session on LinkedIn a little later in the day, and we'll learn about LinkedIn from somebody who has 43,000 members on LinkedIn, Patrick Shelton at the Motorsports Professional Group. That's a lot of people that you can monitor if you're connected with them. The thing is, I found that a lot of people don't update their profiles. So what we were saying, and what Megan said earlier about, sending the document to the wrong person, it could have been the right person 2 years ago, but they didn't update their profile, so now they're no longer the right person. Honestly, a phone call to the receptionist or to someone in the company and just asking the question, I am looking to be sponsored by someone in your marketing department. Is there someone who runs sponsorships, or can I speak to somebody in marketing, or can you tell me who that person is? I found that simple call has gotten me the right name most of the time. They don't always put you through. Usually you hit a voicemail, and sometimes they'll give you email addresses, sometimes they don't. It really depends on the marketing person or on the receptionist, and whether the marketing person has asked the receptionist whether or not or allowed them to give out that info. But I've always found a phone call. And I think we have, is there another question, or no, we're good. Megan, what kind of success have you had in terms of finding the person to contact at the company? Do you have any tips or tricks, anything that I haven't done?
Yeah, well, so for my go-to is always LinkedIn, like you said. It's the most professional way to reach out to them. You could also, I have actually had some success of reaching out through Instagram as well. And so I actually just did this very recently. And the person that handled the social media got me the correct contact information of who I would need to talk to about sponsorships and marketing and all that. So, you can always just send a message. Don't be afraid, if they're going to say no or not say anything back. You won't know unless you send that message. So send them a message, LinkedIn, or even Instagram. I would say Facebook, not so much, just because in my experience, I feel like there's a lot more spam on Facebook. And I know, just even like for me personally, I never even check my messages on Facebook from my business pages. And so I would say you can try Facebook, but I'd say LinkedIn would be the best one. And then after that, reach out on Instagram. Or also, if that company you're trying to get in touch with, if they're more active on a different social media platform, so let's say they use TikTok a lot, then reach out to them on TikTok. So you want to try to meet them where they're at, and also, show them that, hey, you also have a presence there. And so I'll be talking more about that later in my session this afternoon. But and then, like Alex said, picking up the phone call. You could try to send them an email by trying to find their contact information from the website, but it usually just goes to a big email that the company has that probably no one ever checks, or it's never going to be sent off to that right person that you actually need to be in touch with. So I would say phone call would be, again, the best option as well. Or even, hey, if it's someone that's local, you can just go and walk in and try to find the person that way. You don't want to be soliciting them or anything like that, but just, again, focus on building that relationship with them. Don't try to hand in the deck to them the first time you actually get to meet with them. Try to sit down, have a conversation. I mean, exactly like what Eric touched on. Try to figure out, what are they working on, where are their problems, and how can you be a solution for their marketing problems, instead of just being like, hey, I like using your products. I think I would be a good brand ambassador for you. So
yeah, and that's a good point. The getting to know them, I think, is key, and trying to find those opportunities to do so. All the big first races of the season, whether it's, A1 Supercross, Daytona, Indy, every series has a marquee event where all the marketing directors who sponsor teams in those series will go to. Now, I'm not a big fan of poaching sponsors. I've had others do it, and it's, when you call a sponsor that's already in motorsports, that's sponsoring a team, I think you're only trying to take that sponsor away, and you're dividing the pie into too many slices, as they say. It's best to find sponsors who are outside of motorsports and who are competitors of the sponsors in motorsports. But if you are at an event or a trade show, it's pretty easy to meet people, and I like to meet them the day before, or the day when the trade show ends, the day before when they're setting the booth up, or after the trade show ends when they're breaking the booth down. Those are pretty good times to go offer assistance and say, hey, can I give you guys a hand? Here, would you like a beer? Can I get you a water? When you're at an event during a trade show and you walk up and try to meet a marketing person, they're working too. They're at the event trying to sell their products, and they're marketing their brand or marketing whatever it is that they're doing at that show. They're probably not as open and receptive to hearing your pitch. So it's a good place to meet people, but not pitch them. And if you want to get to know them well and offer some assistance, do it beforehand when they're setting up, or do it afterwards when they're breaking the booth down, because then you're in a more casual, non-business environment. I'm hearing that we have one more question, and then we'll go right to a break. And then after the break, we'll start on valuations.
Yeah, Alex, I just wanted to say, I think you answered Ayrton Smith's question. He asked the same thing that you just discussed about meeting people at an event and approaching them, and you did a really good job of answering that. Thank you.
Yeah, at events, because I've often worked events, and when I'm trying to work an event, I'm trying to represent the brand, and all of a sudden people come pitching me all the time. It's just because I have marketing in my title doesn't mean I'm going to accept the deck, or I'm the person that you need to ask for a sponsorship. A lot of the people at trade shows, depending on the size of the trade show, they can often be hired help. So you might be pitching the wrong person entirely because that person was just hired for the weekend, especially in Las Vegas at SEMA and some of the bigger shows. A lot of the people there are not the full-time marketing staff. But when you go to races or events that certain brands will sponsor or want to go to, a lot of the first opening series event and all racing, all motorsports, it usually is a who's who of marketing directors. So there is another quick question.
I just wanted to make a statement. Karen Jankowski said, how do we determine the value, the dollars you're requesting when you approach a brand? Well, that's the next segments that we have coming up. So
that's a perfect question. Yeah, that's a perfect segue. Listen, everybody, we'll take a 1 minute break or 2 minute break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about valuations. All right, welcome back from the break, everybody. So now we're going to go into a pretty important section, and it's called valuations, because value is what a sponsor wants from any type of marketing activity, and sponsorship is obviously marketing. They're not doing it for exposure. They're doing it for other reasons. And different companies have different ways that they value things. What one company may perceive as a ton of value, another company won't care about. That's why in our first session we had an energy drink and some endemic brands. They have different senses of value. What's been most difficult, in my opinion, in the past couple of years is that with the change in how events are run and a lot of online activities now, and COVID changed quite a bit for motorsports, that the values are starting to change. And value now doesn't just come from going to an event and racing and participating in an event and being a brand ambassador. You can create value in many different ways, even when you're not racing. And we're going to talk about value and valuations, because traditionally, and in the book, which was written 10 years ago, there was a very common way to value things. And in motorsports, we had traditional values. You had your logo on your car, your helmet, your race suit. You had banners. You might have appearances, hero cards. You have autograph signings, meet and greets. There's a lot of things, tangible things that you could do that would have a value. And the way you calculate that value is by comparing it to relative media. What I mean by that is, let's say you got 10 seconds on television. If you were to buy a 10-second ad on that same network, what would it cost? Well, if you got 10 seconds of visibility on screen, perhaps that value would be the same as a 10-second advertisement would cost, or a 10-second commercial. If you got a half a page write-up in a magazine, that magazine has a rate card, a media card of what an advertiser would have to pay to get into that magazine. And if you got a half a page write-up, well, the relative value of your write-up might be about half the cost of an ad in that magazine. Now, because of this, the world that we're in, everybody's online. There are many, many, many different outlets and many different social media tools that we can use to create value. And in many cases, the values are changing and they're constantly fluctuating. Where one person might have a lot of followers, a brand could perceive that to have value. Where I personally have learned that the small endemic groups have far more value when it comes to marketing effectiveness than large memberships and large groups with a ton of people, but they don't feel like they're part of a community. So we're going to talk about value, the common deliverables that you can list in a proposal. You want to show what a sponsor will get, because yes, even though the main value may not come anymore from logos and visibility, it is primarily what motorsports has been known for and what racers show and what a lot of the sponsors and the brand managers have seen. So you want to list the value of what you can offer in terms of what Megan was saying earlier in the proposal. You have line items of deliverables that you're giving and you're offering. If you can find a relative media value, you could probably put that in the proposal and estimate what your overall value is. When it comes to intangibles, things like reputation and integrity, well, those are priceless. So those you can't put a dollar amount on. But let's say you're not getting a lot of television time, you're not getting a lot of announcement time, you're not even in the newspapers or the magazines, or you're not being written up because perhaps you're not yet winning races or getting on the podium. Well, you can still create value through what you do if you have a reputation, if you have integrity, if you have a lot of loyal fans, if you have strong relationships with other businesses that you can introduce a company to create B2B and add value to them. So you want to look at value from a sponsor's perspective. It's not how many times you won a race, how many times you got on the podium, how many times you were mentioned. It's how many times your sponsor was alongside you when you won, or how your sponsor helped you in creating that opportunity, which let you tell a story to win, tell a story about winning, and the sponsor is alongside you in that journey of creating value. And it's a story that can be told. If a story can be remembered and shared, now it starts to compound that value. And that's what you have to show in a proposal, which is not that easy. So what we do first is we put line items of the things that are easy, your tangibles. I can give you logos on the following things. I can be at the following events and make a public appearance. I can distribute this information to my database of so many people. I can do a social post and reach this number of followers. And all those things can be quantified. Then the real value comes in to the sponsor of how the sponsor will use what you can do for them through the deliverables that you've listed in order to sell more product or raise their brand equity. And sponsors usually know, because they see, oh, this person's on television, this person's going to be in magazines, they're going to go to 30 events this year, they're going to be in front of 1,000 people at each event. It's a small event, but 30 events, okay, that's 30,000 people. Perhaps they can hand out samples, and now we don't have to send somebody to that event. We can use the racer or the team to do that instead. So the value comes from showing that you are working on behalf of a company as an extension of their marketing, or even an extension of their sales arm, in order to generate revenue for that company. Value is not what you need to race. Gee, I need new tires, I need new wheels of transmission, and I need $100,000. Can you give me $100,000? That's not what we put in a proposal. We put in a proposal the value we can generate for sponsors if they were to purchase similar media or similar visibility in the public media. And George said there's a question.
I think there's more of a comment. I think
Okay.
if you have a case study as well, those are really valuable to showcase.
Yes, and there are several case studies. There's two actually in the book. You can't use the numbers anymore like we did back then. When I wrote Motorsports Marketing and Sponsorships, back then you could say every click was worth 5 cents, or every impression was worth 2 cents, and every visibility was this and that. You could actually put a dollar amount on it and sum it. Things have changed because values have changed. And I guess what we'll have to do is, after this summit, we'll have to update using current example, maybe even Megan's program. We could use that, or someone on the call. We can figure out how they created value. At the end, we're gonna do a sponsorship success story, where you're gonna hear about how Jason Coleman was able to land a primary at Eibach. He's now the Eibach Springs trophy truck driver because of what he did. And he'll tell you how, and we'll show you through a video, the value that he created for Eibach and why they now pay him. So that's a good point. Yeah. Yes, we will do that. The valuation section could go on for 3 or 4 hours. That's how detailed it can get. We're going to try to condense this just into a half an hour of where value is. But there's something I was just thinking and I forgot. Oh, appearances and meet and greets. Your value it doesn't have to be just what you're doing at the races. Your value can come in what you're doing when you're not racing. And I like this example of Ron Capps was telling me once that he spends more time promoting at Napa Auto Parts stores than he does going to racetracks. So he does meet and greets at Napa. That's where the value comes in. He brings people into their retail store because they want an autograph or a poster. So value can be created, and that's, again, what this whole sponsorship summit is about, is how do you create that extra value? Now, the trick is putting a dollar value on it, and that depends on each company. So before I keep going, Megan, did I forget something here? Is anything you'd like to add?
No, I just want to make sure people know that still doing the signage, the logo on the car, on the shirt, hospitality, tickets, anything like that, that's still very important. We're not saying that, you shouldn't be trying to put logos on the car anymore. We're just saying it's so much more vast now when it comes to sponsorship. It's not just getting paid for a decal on the car. It's so much more than that. So B2B, B2C, any opportunities you can do with that. And a great example is hospitality. And so if you do go to any of the big NHRA drag races where you'll see Ron Capps, you see that all of those top fuel teams, they have their pit area with the car where the crew works on the car, and then right next to it they have the hospitality area. And so this is where all of those deals are made at the track, and where they start to they'll bring in people to start conversations to create deals for that. So that's something that if you can do hospitality, that's a great option to have, because you want to be able to bring those marketing executives and the people that make those decisions, invite them out to a race and show them what all you can offer the fans that are going to be there. But then also, you don't just want to make it about you want to make it about them. And so see if you know a retailer or a wholesaler that could help them, invite them also to the race, introduce them there, and then that's how it's a win-win-win situation for all three parts. So we might be talking about hospitality later on, but that's just a really great example. And like Alex said, doing the appearances outside of the racetrack matters too, trying to bring customers to their stores. So whether it's a company that just sells products in the store like Napa Auto Parts, or if it's actually Napa that you're working with, you want to, like they said in the very beginning, you want to just increase that bottom line for them. So however you can help increase sales, and it's really limited to how creative you can get with it. Whatever you can imagine, the number of assets is only limited by what you think you can do. So try to get really creative when it comes to that, but also make sure that you check with your series that you race in to see if there's certain stuff you can and can't do. Because I know from my side of it with NHRA, they can be very limiting as far as what you can do while the event, the drag races are going on. And so like for us, we're not allowed to sell merchandise outside of our trailer. They would need to purchase a spot in the midway in order to do that. So try to see what that cost is, and then see how many people are on average attend that event, and see if it's going to be a benefit for that sponsor to go ahead and purchase that spot and work with you at that race. So make sure you check with your series, but then also really try to get as creative as you can when it comes to the tangible assets.
So in the past, the tangible assets were, like I said, logos on most of the properties that we had, everything from the awning to the side of the hauler to the car, the helmet. But today with social media and the way the internet is changing things, we are now in a world where we have an electronic highway that connects directly from a company's front door to its customer's front door. And that electronic highway could be a click. It's online, it's digital. So a company can instantly reach its customers and give them information or provide the ability to purchase something with that click. And so as a brand ambassador, as a sponsored athlete, as a representative of the company, and as a part of that company's marketing arm, you want to help create that highway and link the company to its customer. And if you can do that, then the company will know how to create value through its own messaging. So sometimes you don't necessarily have to show that you're the one bringing in all the dollars or the money for the brand. If you can make the connection to the brand and its customers, then the company knows how to sell to their customers. That's why they're in business. They will be able to find the value in your relationship with your fans. I learned that on this summit by promoting through my friends who were endemic. They had podcasts, they had shows, they have small followings of just a few thousand followers and viewers that watch their shows. the value that had in spreading the word of getting us the Motorsports Summit out there was far more valuable in effectiveness, far more effective, I should say, than I also partnered with some very large organizations who promoted. And their promotions didn't end up in the same results as the small endemics. So value comes from hidden pockets of like-minded communities, members that all serve a common cause. And if you can be the brand ambassador within that community to a company that wants to reach that following, you can have a lot of value to them. And that's sort of where the line blurs from tangible to intangible, because tangibly, yes, they may be selling more products, but intangibly, if you're elevating their brand equity, they're now selling those products at a higher price. And so everything starts to bloom. Value can be created in hidden pockets. Like Megan was saying, you can go out and find value and you can create value. What I think I'm going to do, I was thinking about it just now, because although the book is outdated in terms of the dollar values that you can attribute to certain line items, like what's a logo worth, what's an impression worth, what's a magazine ad worth, things like that. I did value those, and there's several chapters on valuations in the book. I will make a PDF file of that, and everybody who's on the call today will get a copy for free. I'm just going to send it out. Please don't share it, but use it for your reference. And don't use the numbers that are in the book, because the numbers have changed. Use the concepts of relative value. And the way you do that is, I'm going to start at the beginning. And I know I said a little bit of this already, but I think it'll make more sense for those who are just joining. And I see some people just joined. If you get a write-up in a magazine, call the magazine and get their rate card, get their media card. And their rate card will show how much an ad would cost in that magazine. Let's say you get some TV time. You can call up the network and you can ask the network for a rate card. If an advertiser wants to place commercials on that TV network, what is it going to cost them? Well, there's a rate card. You can get that. So from that rate card, you can estimate a similar value to the visibility that you get either in the magazine or on television, using the relative value. So if you have similar amount of time on screen and it's a clear logo, it's clearly on the screen, you can show that your sponsors are your partners in that marketing, in that event, and that visibility, then it has value to them. And you can probably use the rate card value very accurately. What you don't want to do is guess or estimate a value based upon what you need or what you think the sponsor has the ability to pay. They know better than that. They're not gonna, most marketing directors are there because that's what they do for a living, is they create marketing for their brands using a budget to try to sell more product, and they know what works and they know what doesn't work. In the digital world that we live in, value can easily be determined by results, click-throughs and purchases or inquiries. So they can track and monitor your value. One thing that was said earlier was handing out coupons and samples. Eric was talking about how he can determine ROI because if he goes to an event and gives out a bunch of coupons through a race team, there's a code on that coupon, and they can track to see how effective the racer was in distributing those coupons, which then shows up in the sales, and they can track those sales with the coupon code. So value is something sponsors know. They know it way better than you. So you don't want to show a high fluff value and hope for a lot of money. If anything, you want to show, or you got high costs, I should say, I said that backwards. You want to show a high value of your program, but then charge far less for it. And if you can show 3, 4, 5 times the value of what you're asking in terms of sponsorship cost, sponsorship price, I think that attracts a lot of attention. And what I mean by that is, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Sponsor, I'm going to be in the following magazines, and you can guarantee that with their funds, because you can actually buy an ad, or you can perhaps buy an advertorial, half advertisement, half editorial. You can also do that with several online entities. You can use marketing funds that you get from a company to create media for that company, and that has value. So those things can be listed, and you can present them, things that you can do. If you're relying on results and second and third party media to show your results, you won a race, you're on the podium, you're hoping that now people write about you and share that and promote it. you're probably not going to see as much value as you expected, because most of the time the third party media is more disappointing and doesn't present your story in the way that you want it to be told to represent your sponsor. So valuations are important. Valuations are key. Valuations, especially when you're asking for a certain amount of money, it has to be relative to the company. And from the company's perspective, what is the value to the company? And if you're asking Monster Energy versus Permatex or E3 spark plugs, or let's say K&N filters, what you're asking will have a different value for each of them. So I would not send a proposal to Joe Parsons at Monster that has the exact same deliverables that I'm sending to Tony Yorkman at K&N and asking for the same amount, because what Joe values more would be sampling, let's say, and lifestyle and having fun, where K&N values functionality and performance and winning races. So the dollar amount that you would ask for from each depends on the perspective of the brand. I don't know if that was a question or no. Megan, do you have something that you can add to that?
Yes, I do. So I just want to let people know that you want to ask for the rate card whenever you do the interview with the media, the publication, podcast, whatever you're doing. You don't want to wait till it's a month later, a couple months down the road, because one, you will probably forget. Two, they will probably forget to send it to you, or they might, they've probably done 100 other interviews since then and they forgot who you were. That could happen. So you want to make sure you try to get that rate card before you do it or immediately after you do it. And so that way, then what I like to do is I have a spreadsheet, and I actually use this spreadsheet for my fulfillment report that I send at the end of the year. So in the spreadsheet, I have a column with like the dates, and then I'll have what interviews I've done, or for our entire team, it's not just me, but for our entire team, what interviews or what press, what media have we done, and then have a link to that if it's on the internet, because 9 times out of 10, it's something that you can find online, have a link to it so I can go back and reference it, maybe get a screenshot that I could then include in the fulfillment report, and then have a column for that rate card with the amount, and then also the contact information at that publication. So if I do need to get back in touch with them, I can. So you want to make sure you try to get that right away and have a spreadsheet to keep track of those numbers. So that way, when you are getting ready to present to a potential sponsor, you want to make sure you actually know what those numbers are. You don't want to forget or estimate, like what Alex said. Important to be aware of what their values are for whatever company you're trying to reach out to. You can have, maybe you come up with a list of 100 different assets that you could do. You don't want to use all 100 every single time that you're pitching to a company. You want to sort and pick through, maybe do like 20 of them that you think are going to be a very good fit for that specific company. Because you don't want to just copy and paste. You want to make sure you're presenting something that is actually going to be providing them value, return on investment for them, and also makes you stand out from everybody else, because they're probably getting pitches and decks from hundreds of other racers as well.
That's true. And what we said in the very first session, different companies value different things. And so a retailer values foot traffic into the store. We talked about Ron Capson, Napa Auto Parts. Ron will go to the stores and sign autographs and hand out posters. And that has value because it brings people into the door, which then they perhaps purchase something, or maybe they never went to that store before and now they do. You go to a store once and you're more likely to go to it again if you had a good experience there. A manufacturer, they value functionality. They like to be on the podium. They like to show that their product helped win a race. Or let's say a tool manufacturer, they want to show that the team is using the tools, hand tools, power tools. And they value that kind of visibility if you can use the tools in the pits. A small company, a startup, some company that no one's ever heard of, they do value exposure. The problem with those guys is they never have money. So, you can get a lot of free product perhaps, but you're not going to get cash. So when you're putting together your deck to, or even a proposal at this point, to show a company the value that you can create, you have to keep in mind what type of company it is. The value that you're going to give Monster is very different from the value that you're going to give K&N. And that needs to come through in the proposal based upon the value that they perceive. So if you're not sure, go back and think. If you're a manufacturer, what industry is the manufacturer in? Who are their customers? And this is, by the way, this is important. I forgot to mention this earlier. A manufacturer has a couple customers. There's the end customer that buys the product physically and uses it. But then there's also usually a distributor or a retail partner that they have to sell the product through, unless they're selling direct. Everybody sells direct online nowadays, but we still have retail stores. There's a lot of retail stores out there, and those retail stores are customers of the manufacturer. So the manufacturer is first selling to the retailer, and then helping the retailer sell to the end customer, the consumer that purchases the product. So when you're writing value, are you showing value for the manufacturer because you're helping sell the final product to the consumer? Or are you showing value to the manufacturer because you're getting them into retail stores? There's two places that you can add value to a manufacturer. If you can create those B2B relationships, like our panelists were saying earlier, then that has a lot of value if the retailer can sell through. If you put a lot of products on a shelf and a retailer takes the products from the manufacturer, but now no consumers are buying it, and those products stay on the shelf, well, if you don't have that sell-through, then there's not that much value. So you need to be able to show that you're going to market to pull the products off the shelf. And if your race program can help with that, then that's what brands and sponsors are looking for. It is not, it's not the easiest thing to put in writing and to put a dollar amount on. And you don't always have to put a dollar amount on everything. If there's a relative value that you can compare it to with a rate card or media card, yes. Then you try to put a value so you can show a high number of what the sponsor's getting for your ask in terms of the proposal. But if you're not sure, then you let the sponsor understand what you can do by showing what you can do for the sponsor. And they in their mind will know, oh, wow, this person was going to go to 15 retail stores and make 15 appearances. We don't sell to those retail stores yet, but we would like to. So maybe we'll use this race team to get to know the retailer a little better. A lot of times through racing, you can add value to a sponsor through who your other sponsors are. The marketing director, Bill Stein, came to me and said, look, I want to sell, but we don't have a shock yet ready for the racers, but we are making a shock for the Tundra. Can you position us next to Toyota? Toyota was a main sponsor, and they wanted a B2B relationship out of the sponsorship as opposed to just a sales relationship. And a lot of times value can be created for brands by showing them who you're going to connect them to B2B wise. And I know, Megan, you've done a lot of that with your race program as well, because I know you put your partners together.
Yes, we have. And so a great example would be Menards. And so we, unfortunately, when COVID hit, we lost our partnership with Menards because our deal with them was focused primarily on doing displays and appearances. And so when COVID hit, we couldn't do that. And so unfortunately lost that deal. But for a couple years there, we would go to find Menards stores that were close to whatever racetrack we were visiting for our next drag race. And the day before the race start, we would take the car and go to the store, unload the car, put it right front and center in front of the doors, and give out samples. And so we would then, so we've got the partnership with Menards, but then what samples are we going to hand out? Because Menards sells hundreds of thousands of stuff. So what we did was we actually worked with an agent that would find products that Menards was getting ready to sell in their store. So it could be, anything that they have. And if you don't know what Menards is, they have food products, they do home improvement. They pretty much do a little bit of everything. And so we had the most success with the food and beverage products because it's very easy. Someone can have a little sample when they walk into the store and then love what it was. So we've done anywhere from pretzels to popcorn to an energy drink. And so we would just have a little sample of the food in the cup, and they see the car, they want to come take their pictures, get an autograph signing, all that stuff, get a free sample. And then as soon as they walked in the doors in the store, we had a shelf there, like an end cap display of all those products that we were selling. So that way they would just automatically take it and throw it in their shopping cart and then get the rest of their shopping done. And so stuff like that, like very easy, that led to sales. But that was a B2B partnership that we put together. So we could have done something where it was, direct to consumer with that food product that we were working with, but we probably wouldn't have sold that many products because we didn't have a store that we would sell it at. Or if it's something where I would say, like, I'd have an affiliate link where they could go and buy directly from their website. Probably would not have sold as many products as we did when we brought all the attention to that retail store and had the products right there front and center for them to purchase. So again, kind of get creative. Think of something like that. If there's a local store that's next to your track, and you could go in there and go shopping and see if there's any products that they sell that you currently use and that you love and you think, oh, this would be a perfect fit for us, then try to find a contact at that company and see if you can then reach out to them and do a partnership kind of like that I did. Or maybe there's something that they don't sell that maybe you do have a contact with of a company that you could introduce to that store. So
Right.
yeah, just try and get creative with it.
And right next, yeah, I like that. That's a great example. And actually, let's also cue up Rich Hausman. He might be on here shortly. We're going to talk about value through social media. But right before we do that, if Rich is on, let's get him ready. George is saying we have another question.
Yeah, so the question that came through was per what Megan had asked. Alex, you can probably answer this well. Is Jim Noman asked, were those appearances part of the overall sponsorship partnership, or were those charged on a per appearance situation? Because I think this can vary a lot.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for asking that, because I forgot to mention. Typically, on a personal services agreement sponsorship, and a lot of professional older athletes, retired athletes will have that if they attach to a brand or a brand pays them. That just means that they have to wear the logo all the time, everywhere they're in public, wear the logo, and whatever you're doing in public, wear our logo. That's a personal services agreement. Many later career partnerships are structured like that. When it comes to racers who are sponsored by brands and the brand wants to make that racer do an appearance or go to an event, usually you'll have several events listed in a proposal that you will agree to go to, and the proposal will state who pays for that, whether that is covered by the cost of the sponsorship or if that's an additional cost. And if it is an additional cost, it means that the racer wasn't aware that he or she was going to go to an event, so there needs to be a notice given as well. You need 30 days notice before you're asked to go attend a corporate retreat, or you get 2 weeks notice before they say you have to go represent at SEMA. So those things will be stated in advance. Many times have I seen where a company later on in the year, halfway through a sponsorship, realizes, oh, there's something that we need our athletes to do for us. And they call the athlete and ask, hey, can you come and do this? Well, then the question mark is who pays for it, and how much do they pay for it? So it's nice when that stuff is stated in advance and part of an agreement, as opposed to, shoot, do I do this and now I'm spending my own money and I wasn't counting on it, or do I not do this and upset the sponsor and perhaps they don't renew? So there is a little bit of navigating that relationship that you have to understand. Can you say no to a sponsor if it's an important meeting and they want you to go to it? I went to a Home Depot employee gathering in the Home Depot corporate parking lot. And right next to me was John Force. And it was a surprise to see John Force literally right next to me promoting his sponsors to go and represent at the same event. We were not in public. This was an event strictly for Home Depot employees, so that Home Depot employees could learn more about brands. So there are a lot of events that sponsors will want you to go to. If the sponsor is using you, make sure in advance that it's specified who pays for it. or perhaps, always have like a 10% budget and allocation, say, 10% of the budget will be used for travel. When that 10% of the budget is hit because travel, those expenses have been met, then we need to either add more or stop all travel. So yes, state that stuff in advance. And I'm not sure if Rich is on yet. Megan, have you ever had an experience where they asked you to go somewhere and you weren't expecting it, and then all of a sudden now you didn't know? Do you upset the sponsor, or do you spend your own money to go to the event? What do you do?
Honest, I haven't really had that happen very often. I do always prefer to have it laid out in the proposal. So like example would be SEMA or PRI show. That's a show where we are attending that usually no matter what, just because we want to be there, face to face with everybody and just say hi to our friends and stuff like that. So when a sponsor wants us to, let's say, come and do an autograph signing at their booth at one of the trade shows, even though we do already plan on being there, we want to make sure that we do get compensated for that time, because it is taking away from our plan to maybe, start a potential relationship with another company, or, just renew one with one of our existing sponsors. So, again, like you said, try to have that laid out in the contract. So what I like to do is just say, because maybe when you are signing the contract or creating the proposal, they might not know exactly what those events are that they want you to go to. So you could just say, Megan Meyer will make 5 appearances for this brand, during this year, and then dates and events to be determined. And so that way they can figure that out exactly what, where they want you to show up and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I've done that works for us.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I see that Rich Hausman is queued up, and since we're talking about the value, Rich works with Hookit and Core, and that is the #1 valuation company that puts a value on social media. Rich, you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hey, how are you? I'm doing well. Megan
I'm
and Alex here.
Hey guys, thanks for the invite. I've been listening in, and it's been a great listen so far.
Thank you for that. Value is hard because it's probably the most important topic when it comes to sponsorship, is what value can somebody provide, and then how does a sponsor view that value? And there's always a disconnect. What a team or an athlete thinks has value is often not the same thing that a company thinks has value, but you can provide a metric that standardizes the value. It's a tool that companies and athletes can use to actually put a dollar figure on visibility. Can you explain real quick how that works? Maybe for those people who don't know and don't use Hookit or Core,
Yeah.
give us a quick overview of what Hookit is.
It's changed a lot, and I think it's a big question. But and I do think putting value on social at a dollar side of things is actually new territory. And I heard you folks talking about rate cards on traditional media, and I think there's the same rate card for social media value and spend and let's call it technology. So
Right.
what Hookit does is a lot. There's different facets of what we do, but in general, we do look at what sponsorship in the world of and how that pertains to digital media, and valuations, metrics, commerce, which is my fancy title of manager of commerce, actually ends up being the old school part of our business, which as I listened in, it was pretty fun to hear some of the big of the companies really talk about sales being the focus, and that's about as core as it gets. And so without confusing everyone who's listening in, Hookit does do a lot of valuation around social media and sponsorship. I happen to be managing our oldest piece of the business that looks at ROI on ambassador programs. So still seems to be in the wheelhouse of what we've been talking about.
Nice. ROI on ambassador programs. So you can actually put a dollar figure on the results that an athlete is getting through social media. And that athlete or the company can look at that and compare it to other athletes in the same series or the same sport, and you can see who's worth more socially.
Yeah, that's close. I think in my world, as far as dollar value in commerce, actually does come down to real dollar value and direct to consumer purchases.
Right.
Take that and what it means into the social media and putting dollar value next to an athlete. We have brands using our data to look at that value versus, say, let's just use two big time athletes like, we'll use the stick and ball world, but LeBron James and Cristiano Ronaldo. You know, we can have a brand look at the value between those two and make sponsorship data decisions off of that.
What are the metrics then that the algorithms use? You and I were just talking once, and if I remember right, it had to do with reach and commitment and performance.
Right.
What can athletes, or in this case, we're talking to racers who are looking for sponsorships or to increase their value to current sponsors. What can they do, or what do they need to know in order to increase their value to sponsors in the way that the Hookit algorithms are going to find their social posts and put a dollar amount on it? What do racers need to know?
Another heavy question, but I do think what's great about the first part of this summit has been very fundamental. And I think I'll lean on that, because what racers and athletes and ways to drive value, a lot of it is knowing how to spell a hashtag from the brand, knowing what app mention, and if they do participate more on Instagram, and then combine that with, if you are competitive and you do events, I think people were addressing it sort of lightly, but finishing well at events still does matter, right? So that being on a resume is also good. But how Hookit pertains to this, and how I think that we can look at what we've done. One of the questions that I know is going to come up here is the word interactions and the word valuation.
What is an interaction? Yeah, what does that mean exactly?
Right. I picked up on Megan's proposal, and I think on her social media slide, she used some stats, and I think she used the word impressions, which I think that largely is spread across all media, right? We've all heard that word. Even interactions these days might be the newer word that we use towards social media. I still use and hear that word a lot, but for what it means to me, and I think what we would love to keep as a fundamental, is it's what you can do on the social media platform. So I'm sitting on Instagram right now, wanting to click and like a photo. That heart that you put on that is an interaction. If I today found out who Megan Meyer was and wanted to follow her, that's an interaction. So don't confuse that with being a follower, though. Just to make a determination, because I can unfollow you, and that is an interaction, not a good one, right? So there's a lot of terms that are being used. So I use the word interactions kind of loosely, but if we're on Twitter, a retweet is an interaction. If I'm on Facebook and I shared a post, that's an interaction. If I liked something, that's an interaction. So truth be told, you have a certain number of followers, you get a number of interactions. What does that create? We over at Hookit call that engagement. So that's also a buzzword that you might hear tossed around in all different ways. What does engagement mean? For me, that's power to weight, or us racing folks, that's horsepower, right? There's things like that you might want to look at that can be fundamental. But what Hookit did from day one was rank you on interactions. You can have 50 followers and you get 49 interactions per post. That's about a 99% engagement rate, right? Really, really good. So the numbers across the board that we've learned over 10 years, I think, Alex, you and I touched on this, but just to kind of lay it flat, 5% 5% engagement is actually good. So that goes along with the idea that when you post something, only 10% of your followers actually see it until you actually pay. So there's definitely some fundamentals, just like your rate card, that we've been looking at forever. So that's about as I think as 30,000 foot as I can keep it.
Nice.
Yeah. I like to approach my social media is to always include a CTA, or what's known as a call to action. So telling the the followers or the person that's viewing it, hey, like this post or leave a comment, share it with your friends, save it so you can come back and reference it later on, stuff like that. So no matter what post I'm doing, I always try to include some type of call to action that's going to initiate that interaction. That's what they're doing. And so engagement is also like one of those things that I include when I am trying to do a sponsorship deck, or I always do include it in my fulfillment reports. And so, Rich, I wanted to ask you, how do you calculate engagement rate?
That takes an algorithm, and to sit here and talk about that right here would probably bore us all to death, and I'm not qualified to do that. So because algorithms are a buzzword as well, we initially took the idea that interactions were most important, and then knew that folks with big followings were valuable. So when we looked at that data, we did go and take the rate cards of the Coca-Colas, the Nikes, the Visas, and asked face to face, what do you pay for this promoted post, this particular, name it, for what it's worth, a media spend. And then we put our algorithm inside that and then spit out a dollar value next to an athlete for their post, for the brand. So I think that circles me back to, maybe, I don't know if this is going to end up being right now, right here, but I ended up writing notes here because I do think it's important that fundamentals are probably preached from day one. And I think that was awesome to hear some of the big talk about, in the end, sales matter. And I think today there's some mistakes being made quite fundamentally that, I have in bold right here is like, if you have 7 sponsors, they don't go all on one post. And that kind of goes with and against the grain, because I do think there's some social media gurus that you can jump on YouTube right now that say, put 14 to 20 hashtags on every post. You might get a follower. And in the world of racing, in the world of sponsorship, I think that idea makes sense, but also we leave very fast and we will never come back. And so in the world of promoted posts, that's something that might need to be discussed, is that if you go down the freeway or you go across the track and you look over at K&N's banner, he for sure doesn't put Monster Energy on there. It's just K&N. And down a billboard on the freeway, McDonald's does not put Chipotle next to it. And the fact remains is that if you can conceptualize social media just like a magazine ad or a freeway, I do think your value goes way up. And that's something I did put down here, is because value has been discussed so highly here, one post for one brand is worth 10 of yours that have 7 on them.
Wow.
So if you keep that in mind, maybe that cuts down your time, but also formulates a plan that says, oh, I have 7 sponsors. That's easily 7 days worth of content right there. And the value by just using one sponsor is exponentially higher. So Hookit happens to know that from day one. I potentially can see that from another angle, where that user that does have high interactions, uses correctly spelled hashtags, does promoted posts, does sell the most product. So to loop that back to what everybody was asking here, I don't want to say 100%, but most and all of the time, that person with the high interactions has the highest chance of ROI on sales. So if it's all working, it's all working.
Nice.
Yeah, well, Rich, I love how you said that you don't have to tag all your sponsors in one post. You can spread that out and do 7 posts for 7 different sponsors. And so later on today, I'm going to talk about content categories and creating posts like that for sponsors. So instead of, trying to be like, oh, here's a picture of my race car. You can see all the sponsors' logos on it. I'm going to tag all of them there. Instead, try to spread it out to where, okay, this post is going to be about this sponsor, and then this post is going to be about this sponsor. So that way, for you as a content creator, it's easier for you, and you're not stressed out thinking, oh my gosh, I don't have anything to post because I've already talked about all the sponsors. So
That's
so
a good
I
point.
love,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that you mentioned that. So I'll be talking about that later on.
Yeah, so we got a question in the chat room. I think actually one statement that said, do social media platforms like Instagram or Facebook offer interaction or engagement numbers without special software? I think that can probably be answered later, and I think the special software is going to be the answer. But Dina actually Paris said, the lines have been blurred, unfortunately. Many companies now seem to be valuing influencers over much else. How do you combat that? And I think what Rich was saying is pretty much combating that already. He's giving you the tools to be able to combat against the influencers as a racer.
Well, maybe there's two parts with that. There is available software that shows you interactions, and it is, I've been working here 18 years, and it's almost like from day one that was the number. So, when an athlete in a certain sport signs up on Hook It and connects their social media, we actually immediately tell you how many interactions you get. So what it doesn't tell you is if, Megan, let's use you just because I saw NGK was a sponsor. It's not going to tell you through a Hook It profile or maybe even any third party. So we're not just overstating Hook It, but it's not going to tell you how much value you drive for NGK. It might tell you how many interactions you get on Instagram. I think it's then up to the particular athlete or the marketer or whoever's looking at your social media. Which logo placement did you use? When and if was it a spark plug type post? Not what you had for dinner, right? Like that's not what they're going to be looking at. And again, it does all mix in. Everyone knows lifestyle, and hopefully no one's really answering that. But that part of doing individual posts towards sponsors, and the value behind it simply is just the fundamentals behind it.
What you said, so this was something that I learned from you, Alex, was that so if you are doing a sponsored post that's about one sponsor, or even if, let's say, it's a magazine ad and they're using the picture of your car and you have, since we're using NGK, let's just say that because NGK was the big title sponsor on the side of my car. They had the biggest logo placement and the best spot on my car. So it was easily seen in all the pictures, whether on social media or in print. And so whenever, like, let's say Lucas Oil uses one of my pictures in one of their magazine ads, it's promoting Lucas Oil, but then NGK is still getting a little bit of that, that exposure from that advertisement. So even though we're focusing on one of the other sponsors, just because the sponsors that do have those logo placements and those decals on your car, they can still get value from it and without having to directly pay for it. So I just wanted, that was just something that I had learned from Alex, and so kind of something that you touched on as well, Rich.
Yeah, no, it's all fair game. I do think even mixing sponsors, as you can see, Instagram just launched something where there is the ability, you can see a co-partnership type post. They're a little bit newer, but the idea that you can put two sponsors on one post, I can visually think of tires and rims, right? Like if the tire shot fits, everything works, but we have data that says like after the third hashtag, really after the second at mention, the stats drop off considerably. So those that are using multi hashtags, it's detrimental to your posts. And then even to the point of spacing the ... and doing the rack of hashtags below, you're actually immediately decreasing the value. And then even maybe put that one more step where if you're writing out a post and you use the hashtag at the end of the sentence, as opposed to early in the sentence, you're also heavily decreasing the value. So when you're thinking about how to use a hashtag, try to use it early. Because if you do see the more symbol and you're scrolling, think about it in your mind, no one clicks more. So it might appear that that's a really cool button that you could hit more of them. Nobody hits it. So that's our mentality and what basically our API data tells us. So
Nice. Well, that's good to know. So, Rich, is there, what would you say would be a limit for the number of hashtags someone should use in a post?
no more than 3.
Okay. And would that be
for a sponsor post? I mean, here's what I'm saying is if NGK, I mean, maybe they have more than 3 hashtags they'd like you to use. Typically, don't use all of them, right? Pick the one that you like or you're getting more interactions on. That is the one to use. So spelling it correctly, using it early is way more important than how many you use. In fact, it should be number 1. And then, you know, I don't want to question anyone's intelligence here, but I actually put it as notes here. Everyone should know the difference between a hashtag and an at mention as well, because it's brought up a lot. Like, I did the hashtag, they should see it, and not really is that the case if it's, you know, hashtag drag racing, right? I mean, everyone's going to see that, but if it's NGK drag racing, you might sell a few, right?
So, quick question for those people, and not me, obviously, I know what this means. What is the difference between a hashtag and an at mention?
I call it in the racing world, the hashtag is the search term. So that's what you put into Google. And the at mention is the sticker on your car. So if there's a model of the rim, if there's a type of tire, that's the hashtag. But you'd never not put Dunlop or never not put Goodyear. That's your at mention and your sticker on the car. I come from a 2-wheel environment, so I always say sticker on the fender because that's on a motocross bike, but you would never rip the sticker off the fender. So if in question, never question it, always use the sticker, because that ensures there's a chance they're going to their page. The hashtag is only a search term. So your chance of it being something to sell the product most likely needs to have the brand name in it. So that's the way I think of it.
Yeah, that's great. George said there was a question.
So we had a question from Nicole, and she says, does the hashtag quantity apply to non-sponsored posts as well?
No, not necessarily. I think that might be where the gray area is, that I don't want to sound like I know how to do it. I know the data. And those that use a bunch of hashtags have a lot of chances to get a couple followers.
Okay.
So,
that's fair.
I mean, if you want a couple and you're into that, go for it. But when they leave, they may never come back. So be careful. Someone might really like E3 and you send them there because of NGK and they will never come back. So that's just the idea. No trickery really works unless it's supposed to sell.
What about the frequency or duration of posts? Is there something as posting too many times or too much?
Yes, absolutely. But I do think that comes down to where the knowledge comes into knowing where you get the most interactions. I think the focus should be more on, we use the word posting natively to the brand, to the platforms. So if you use the big 3, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you should have 3 different posts and you should not share that post across all 3. So that's just fundamental.
Oh, that's interesting. And data shows that, you're saying that's not just a personal preference. This is new to
personal
me.
Preference.
This is new information. Yeah. Excellent.
No, it's still pretty common knowledge. I mean, if Facebook and Instagram is a little different, but if you're going to share that over to Twitter, something as simple as the sticker on the fender doesn't work, right? Because the Twitter at mention could be spelled differently. So right away, you know you have a problem. And are you going to go fix it on Twitter and take that time? Well, that could be your choice, but you know, there is some other fundamental things between Facebook and Instagram, and one of them could be that the native version of video is square on Instagram. So of course on Facebook you can turn and it could be 16:9 and have a wide aspect ratio. So if you're trying to get your length of your dragster on Instagram, you might cut off very quickly if you shared a video over from Facebook. So really, it comes down to posting natively, but more importantly, those brands or the platforms reward you for doing that. So Twitter does not want to give you credit for the shared Instagram content you put over there, right? In fact, they're going to make it probably as hard as it's going to be to until you post it natively over there. And it actually also goes deeper into the demographics, which is pretty boring, but we all know that Facebook tends to be older, Instagram younger. So if you're posting content and thinking it's going to be the same between the two, not very smart. So I always say my dad and mom read my Facebook, and my younger cousins read my Instagrams, and if I'm using family. So I do know that makes sense, but marketers and people putting out content spend a lot of time figuring out between native platforms.
All right, that's a really good point. And then we have 60 seconds left for one more question, one final question. What do we got, George?
All right, so I think this final question is, you mentioned the big three being Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. How is TikTok and YouTube compared to those three?
YouTube, you need to be really looked at as maybe after 5,000 subscribers, they start to give good data. TikTok's engagement rates are exceeding everything. They just don't give back good data to third parties. So we at Hookit are a third party with contractual relationships with the big three, and then we do track data on TikTok, but it's more of on a case by case basis. Their data comes through a little differently. So, but very valuable. And still, we didn't mention Snap, but that Snapchat, but they're there too. We consider the big three the Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and YouTube is a beast of its own.
Right on. Well, hey, Rich, thank you very much. That's very insightful. I learned a lot on that session. I'm not a huge social media user. I use it to monitor my family, my parents, my children, but I try not to post too much unless, of course, I'm promoting a summit. Then I have to, right? And I'm learning from all of you how to do it right. So thank you. Thank you for all the insight. I appreciate it. This is a very, very informative session. Now we're going to go to another session in creating value. This is value that some people just recently discovered during COVID. A lot of events were canceled, and so some racers actually jumped into simulators, and some had already been in simulators for a long time, racing virtually. So Jim Beaver is the host of the Jim Beaver Show. I've known him a long time. He is also one of the very first racers I know, real racer, track racer, who got into iRacing and virtual racing. Jim is one of the, I think there's only 20 eNASCAR franchise holders. He's one of them, and he's going to be discussing today with Joe Brickey from VRS Virtual Racing School how to create value online and through sim racing. Jim, I'm going to hand it over. How you doing?
I'm doing good, buddy. Life is good. Can't complain.
Right on. All right.
So, yeah.
Help us understand, how do we create value for brands and sponsors through online racing? And because it's a topic I don't know that much about, I'm going to exit the scene and I'm going to let you take over. It's all yours.
Well, appreciate it, Alex, and thanks for the opportunity. And I think one of the big things is quite like a lot of people tuning in now. I'm a professional off-road racer in the real world, and so I have a real-world racing program, and we've been able to apply that to the sim racing world. Also have a media company where we do quite a few things. So it's been really interesting to see, kind of the differences in how you can leverage what you're doing in the real world and apply it to the sim racing world. And I'd like to introduce Joe Brickey with Virtual Racing School, who we'll be talking through things. So don't know if you want to give us a little background on Virtual Racing School, Joe, before we get started, and kind of what you do for them, and then we'll kind of get rolling.
Yeah, sure. So Virtual Racing School, VRS, has both software for sim racing drivers, which is basically a telemetry that comes from everything they do on the track, from their racing line to their braking inputs, etc. Plus, the coaches for VRS do tutorials to teach iRacers every single track, and they provide setups for the tracks who use setups to help allow the racers to go faster. And I'm the marketing director for VRS, and just a little quick plug, and we're giving away a free pedal set over the next month if you go to our Virtual Racing School on Facebook. It's a place you can see it. So
And I think that's one thing that's really interesting about VRS is, yeah, not only do you guys provide a service online, but you also have peripherals for sale in the real world. So it's kind of, to me, you guys are an interesting mix of both the digital space and real tangible assets that you can sell. I mean, it's a multi-headed kind of business model.
Yes, true.
So I know with me, and I'm sure you can chime in on this. And I got involved in sim racing, with Jim Beaver Esports about a year or two, prior to the pandemic, and we kind of started developing our roster of athletes, and we had our eNASCAR franchise. Tell a lot of people, once the pandemic hit, it was like this entire industry, the sim racing industry, moved forward 5 years. I feel like it almost pulled everything forward, and we weren't prepared. The infrastructure wasn't prepared, but all of a sudden the world shut down, and the only thing to do was sim race. There was no real world racing, and I feel like a lot of us, all of a sudden, it was just, we're kind of thrust and pushed into the limelight because, it was just one of those where we weren't prepared for the mass influx of people and interest that sim racing got. And I don't know if VRS was very much the same way.
Well, VRS had an interesting opportunity when it all happened. One of our top teams that we sponsor is the Quanda esports team, and they ended up training the entire Porsche factory team to, basically acclimatize them to sim racing. And now flash forward to today, now Quanda is actually running the sim sport for Porsche. So that's how the motorsports and the sim racing sports have kind of blended together since the pandemic started.
Yeah, and I know with our team, and we'll kind of get in, I know we want to gear this more towards, the real world racers kind of coming into sim racing. And I think that's where virtual racing school is actually a phenomenal asset for a lot of people, tuning in that may just be starting to get involved in sim racing, or maybe, they haven't quite yet, but they've, there's a lot of interest there. But I know with us, it's been really interesting because we've got our real world race program, and we've got some amazing corporate partners. And the sim racing thing through our team has kind of become a valuable asset because, much like social media, when you're away from the track, social media, serves its purpose to continue to get your story out, get the word out on what you're doing. Well, I think sim racing takes that 10 steps up because, not only do you have social media, now you've got an entire race program that you can package and market towards your sponsors that are in the real world. And now, they're getting the same value, if not more. I mean, I know, our eNASCAR numbers, I was just looking at some of them, we're averaging over 100,000 viewers per race, and a lot of a lot of real world live streams don't pull in 100,000 viewers per race. So our partners that we've got there, in our real world program, now all of a sudden, on an off week, they're getting 150,000 eyeballs on their product, on their logos, on their story, that they're not getting, by anybody else. So to us as a real world program, our sim racing program has become infinitely valuable, to continue to deliver, ROI to our partners on off weeks when we're not racing.
And speaking of off weeks, yeah, I think some of the top motorsports racers, we work with Alex Palou, Roman Grosjean, and some Sage Karam's one of our coaches or one of our racers for Quanda. But all of those gentlemen are different levels of basically notoriety or fame, and they're picking up more followers online. Roman Grosjean is probably the most popular driver in IndyCar because of his massive social following. So it's one of the things I encourage real racers to do is build your following on social media to increase your value. And Alex Blow has done that. Twitch, he started Twitch sometime during the pandemic. And he's up to, 15,000 followers now. And so it's really important.
Yeah. Well, and I think, along those lines with the sim racing and as a personal brand, it's really good because, I take Connor Daly, who during the pandemic, he kind of started a Twitch channel and it became super popular, and here's an IndyCar driver who people see race, on the weekends and things like that, but they might not really know Connor. Obviously they've got a little bit of, feedback into his life via social media, but now all of a sudden he goes sim racing and he invites everybody to his Twitch stream. Now people are tuning in, and it's not the high pressure situation a lot of times when he's just having a fun race with friends, things like that. So they really get to know the driver's personality. They get to know how he's like, his jokes, things like that. So it just builds that personal branding, so when he does go back to the track, these fans follow him back and forth between the virtual world and the real world. And so I've seen that with a lot of drivers being an awesome asset for them and their personal brand to be able to tell their story and get people attached to it, because, you can't necessarily do that on national TV, during an IndyCar weekend.
Yeah, no, they don't. They don't really have that much interaction except for a handshake and a picture. But yeah, on the Twitch channels and Twitch is like the real important one. They get to know the drivers, and then they build up that loyalty and that following with these people who actually get that interaction. I mean, they get to talk to them. I mean, Tony Kanon's doing it, and Alex and others are all doing it. And it's a really good way to get your following growing and fan, like you said, fan loyalty. So definitely.
I've got a question for you. I mean, talking about value and what sim racing brings to real world racers. I mean, obviously there's, most of the tracks in the iRacing service are real world tracks. I know on the off-road side, Crandon, I've had the opportunity to burn a ton of laps in a sim on Crandon, and I've been to Crandon in the real world, and it's scary how close they are. With VRS, you guys offer, a schooling for that. How many real world drivers are you getting coming to VRS and coming to iRacing and sim racing strictly to get more lap time on tracks that they haven't been to or that they may need some work on?
Yeah, that's a really good point and a question. And what I see and what I've seen is the more the drivers get sim racing time on a track, the better off they perform once they get to the real track. I mean, Roman Grosjean's doing little presentations every week or every track week on the track he's about to race, and he's doing that in R Factor 2. And Alex is doing a whole synopsis after the race, going through what happened during the race. But I think it's invaluable how much time you get on the sim. And we actually Honda has their big league simulator, but they bought equipment from us to get guys more time on the sims before they got into the big sim, because they don't have two of them. So yeah, it's super important. I think it's invaluable for real racers to get that track time in the sim.
Yeah. I find interesting too, because, sim racing kind of started out as an outlet for drivers to kind of have some fun, when they're away from the track. Real world drivers I'm talking about, there's a lot of professional sim racers that's all they do. And, but I know real world racers, I mean, I've got one on my team, Connor Berry, who's, he's a professional off-road racer. Now he's world championship level, in dirt road on, in iRacing. And you guys have Mitchell DeYoung, who comes over from, off-road and rallycross and things like that. And now he's become one of the top sim racers in the world. And I find this interesting. We're getting to a point where lines are blurred now, where drivers can actually be pro level good in both sim racing and in the real world, and that crossover has become kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's the fact that the driver pool in sim racing is so huge compared to real world racing, right? So what ends up happening is some of the best sim racers, they can quickly transfer over to real racing. And there's one guy got a world's fastest sim racer, got a seat at McLaren and won a race after like 3 or 4 races. Craziness, right? But he was like the best of the best, right? And at the same time, the real world drivers, some of them don't keep up with the best sim racers because they're so used to the sims. But at the same time, they come over and they're dominating really fast. So you can see the talent and the experience is there. So yeah, it's a great combination these days.
Yeah, and I know I've looked at it, as a tool for real world racers too, and obviously we'll get into kind of the sponsorship thing in a minute, but I was just recently at the iRacing offices, and they put me in a full motion sim with the Formula One car going up Mount Washington. And, here I go, I spun the Formula One car off the cliff, and I just laughed. I go, well, that was about a $20 million mistake, jokingly saying that. But, the fact is you can spend so much time and burn so many laps, where if you go to a real track, all of a sudden you've got brake pads, you've got gas, you've got all these, wearables, consumables on the race car that immediately, as soon as you fire up a race car, the costs start escalating. Until you turn that thing off, it's just the ticker continues to run. It costs money. Yeah. With iRacing and sim racing, it's amazing because you can just burn lap after lap after lap, and it's not costing you anything. So you can really experiment. You can make mistakes, and it's okay because it's not going to cost you any money.
Yeah, and you get a lot more. You call it reps or shots to the basketball rim or whatever. You get a lot more, and then that muscle memory, whether it's your braking or your throttle or your steering input, it's all there. It's all there, and it counts. Towards if you get in the same car on a real track. and now, and also all the little nuances of the track that you learned in iRacing go right back. I mean, Alex was telling me the other day about how important it was for him to learn one of the tracks that he didn't know very well. And how did he do it? Sim racing.
So here's a question. Obviously, you're marketing director for VRS. When you're looking at at sponsoring a sim racer or a real world driver, no, when you guys are looking at sponsoring, say, a real world racer that's that's doing some sim racing or just a hardcore sim racer, what does VRS look for?
Well, we have done limited real world sponsorships, and we've done some autocross in Spain recently for one of our coaches, Pablo Lopez. So we got him his first professional seat, and then GT4 in Germany with one of the guys there. So we've been doing a little bit of that, but a lot of promoting the sim racing guys and getting them sponsorships and helping them with their teams and equipment and things like that. But we're always open to it, but it's limited on the real world side. So if they also sim race, really good chance. So Moritz Lohner, he is in Germany, and he's one of the best sim racers on Race Room, and so, but he also drives GT4. So that was how we connected with him. So yeah, getting more fame and ability in the sim world, increases your chances with DRS basically.
Yeah, well, and I think with drivers that are tuning in that are looking at sim racing, and I know a lot are already involved in it. I feel like sim racing is starting to go hand in hand. I mean, you look at the Cup level of NASCAR, you look at IndyCar, things like that. I feel like having that in your back pocket, hey, I sim race, it goes hand in hand with having a good social media following, with your real program, and things like that. So I feel like it's almost becoming a part of the sponsorship package that certain sponsors are looking at. I know we've been really fortunate, that we've been able to bring some of our real world sponsors into the sim racing world. General Tires helped fund our television on CBS Sports and things like that. But our sim racing has brought in some non-endemics. We've had, Big Green Egg, Fistful of Bourbon, some of those companies that weren't even interested in our real world program. They strictly wanted the demographics of sim racing. I think that's one of the cool things, and you could probably speak to the demographics, but we've got our demographics that tune into real world racing on TV and live streams, but the demographics, there is some crossover, but it skews younger and it's very much different for sim racing. So I think that's another thing that athletes that are tuning in and drivers, need to keep in mind, that you're getting these numbers with sim racing, but it's a different number. It's different people. It's a different demographics. And not only are you talking to people at the track and people tuning in on TV, in sim racing, you're talking to an entire new group of people.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about it is number one. So the sim racing community consumes different types of products than your average, motorsports fan. Okay, sitting at TV or in a living room or whatever. And so like the Mountain Dew drinkers and some of the other products like that, Coca-Cola is a great example, doing a $300,000 sponsorship for NASCAR, right? And and I also think that the next generation of motorsports fans is going to come from sim racing, a large chunk of it, because they do the sim racing, they fall in love with the car, they fall in love with the track, they fall in love with the racing. And now all of a sudden they're following the racing. It happened to me. So, and I know it's happening to a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, sim racing adds that level where you can go to the track, you can watch, say, the Daytona 500 on TV, and then you can turn around and immediately go and experience what it was like for those drivers to race, in your living room. And the thing I love about sim racing is it doesn't take a lot of money to get to the world championship level. I think it's one of those where you can go and buy a pedal set and a steering wheel, and obviously we see these extravagant rigs online and things like that. Doesn't take that much to get started, but like you mentioned, Coca-Cola and their $300,000 sponsorship of NASCAR, I mean, some of these drivers have never driven in the real world. They bought a set of pedals and a steering wheel and worked their way up through the ranks, and now all of a sudden they're world championship level and they're competing for $100,000, and they're and we've got upwards of 200,000 people tuning in to watch them every Tuesday night. To me, that's remarkable because the cost of entry isn't like it is in real world motorsports. It's very low.
Yeah, definitely.
So, thank you, Joe. Okay. Thank you, Jim. That was an outstanding session, creating value through virtual racing, sim sponsorships.
Everybody, we're going to take a break now so we can render this Zoom call. We will see you back in 40 minutes. Jim, Joe, thank you.
Thanks.
We'll
Thanks,
see you
Alex.
guys
Yeah,
at the
on,
very end.
Alex. All right.
Take care, guys.